American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 581-600. Boom boom boom. The bolters in the hands of the mourners instantly emitted deafening bolter roars. As countless bolters flew, 5 stormtroopers, vigorously driving their power armor, also violently swung their ceramite arms. The vibranium power swords, firmly gripped in their palms, rapidly activated their azure blue disruption fields. Thump thump thump. In the blink of an eye, the stormtroopers, with their surging murderous aura, repeatedly shattered the metal floor with their magnetic boots. They launched a swift and fierce charge towards Nick Fury and the others. Pung pung pung. However, a few seconds earlier, a green-skinned alien closest to Nick Fury suddenly raised its palm. A layer of energy shield, entirely composed of a large number of blue particles, temporarily blocked all the terrifying firepower aimed at them. Unfortunately, as the explosive firelight from the continuous bolter explosions and the metal shrapnel from the explosions continuously impacted the energy shield, the green-skinned alien, struggling to maintain the shield, quickly contorted its expression. Fury, activate the Tesseract. We can't escape. Rather than being completely torn apart by the enemy, it's better to die at the hands of our own people. The Skrull named Talos shouted loudly at Nick Fury without any hesitation. In the brief moment when the other party turned his head to speak, the remaining dozen or so Skrulls had already used the superpowers they had copied from humans. They either strengthened their physical bodies or emitted energy fluctuations, and continuously rushed out of the range of the energy shield, pouncing fiercely on the Astartes and stormtroopers attacking from the front and back. Ch. However, with the repeated chopping of the cold and ruthless metal giants, with their power swords and chainswords, the Skrulls, desperate counterattack instantly fell into a disadvantage, suffering heavy casualties. Old friend, see you in the next life. At this moment, Nick Fury, his lips trembling slightly, stared at the flying limbs and blue blood within his field of vision and took a deep breath. With a deathly gray heart, he took one last look at his alien old friend, who was close at hand, and then pressed the activation device in his palm. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this moment, the terrifying explosion and energy shock that Nick Fury had expected did not arrive. He quickly turned his gaze and looked at the huge mechanical device not far away. But he saw strands of scarlet energy tearing and destroying every corner of the transmission device. Although this unlearned apprentice of mine doesn't understand how alien machinery works, she is best at destroying precision instruments, so your only hope for a desperate comeback is also shattered. Doom's cold voice once again crossed the mid-air of the passage, slowly echoing in everyone's ears. The next moment, he then drove his power armor and stepped forward. Beneath the violently lifted dark green cloak, a ceramite palm, raised rapidly, gripped forward with force. In an instant, a large amount of surging invisible telekinetic power, like Mount Tai pressing down, heavily squeezed on the collapsing energy shield. PFF'd. And the Skrull who was struggling to maintain the energy shield immediately knelt on one knee. An uncontrollable stream of blue blood continuously gushed out from its mouth and nose. The next second, as a large number of blue particles on the energy shield evaporated and dissipated, the energy shield, covered with cracks, completely collapsed and shattered. Immediately afterwards, the ubiquitous invisible telekinetic power grabbed Nick Fury's throat and instantly dragged his entire person in front of Doom. Ch. At the same time, Doom's other ceramite palm flicked his fingertips. A beam of dazzling energy quickly cut through the air, forcibly pierced through the last Skrull who was trying to get up and resist, completely ending the other party's life. The alien problem has been solved. Do you have any last words, you who betrayed humanity? Doom's cold gaze pierced through the visor. Staring at Nick Fury, who was almost close at hand, he asked softly. Hiss. Time will prove whether I'm right or wrong. I'll be waiting for you in hell. Hearing Doom's words, Nick Fury, his eyes gradually bloodshot, gasped for breath. While trying to suppress the instinctive struggle of his body, he stared hard at Doom in front of him and said with difficulty. Boom. The next second, Doom, without any reply, violently waved his ceramite palm. A large amount of terrifying flames from the edge of hell completely enveloped Nick Fury's entire body. In the blink of an eye, it burned the other party into a charred and incomplete corpse. As you wish. However, just as Doom, after casually throwing down the corpse, intended to turn around and step forward to find the Tesseract. Teacher, look quickly. Doom, there's a situation. The exclamations from Wanda and Jessica instantly interrupted Doom's advance. Caw caw caw. At this moment, inside that dilapidated and huge mechanical creation, strands of terrifying energy, like blue flames, were constantly emitting outwards. Wanda, use your ability to try to suppress the Tesseract. Everyone else retreat immediately. Retreat quickly. At this moment, Doom, after just glancing at the changed situation, unhesitatingly issued several orders. The Astartes and stormtroopers ran towards the depths of the passage without any hesitation, quickly disappearing into the depths of the passage. And Wanda, wearing none armor, stepped forward fearlessly. Strands of scarlet energy once again surged out of her body, quickly projecting towards the increasingly active Tesseract. At this moment, Jessica, holding a master-crafted scythe, tapped the ground a few times with her magnetic boots, instantly arriving beside Doom. She rotated her metal helmet, stared at Doom, and said in a deep voice, "Doom, what are you planning to do? Don't worry about the Tesseract for now, let it vent its activated energy first. Why make Wanda take the risk?" As soon as she finished speaking, Jessica's words were immediately rejected by Doom. He stared at Wanda, who was constantly competing with the Tesseract, and murmured, "No, I'm sure Wanda has completely destroyed this alien creation, so this is definitely not a backup plan left by Nick Fury and the others, and if it was an explosive shock caused by the Tesseract, then we should have died just now. I now suspect that this is a problem with the Tesseract itself." "Wait, are you saying?" Jessica, who was listening intently, was slightly stunned. She then tightened the master-crafted scythe in her palm and focused her gaze on the location of the Tesseract. Since the Tesseract, or rather the Space Stone, can open portals to the entire universe, then since it is a door, if someone deliberately tries, perhaps they can open the door from the world outside the door. At this moment, Doom, without moving his metal helmet, took a deep breath. The dark green cloak he wore outside his power armor moved without any wind. The whole person seemed to have prepared to re-engage in battle. If I'm not mistaken, something is coming. Bang, 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 accompanied by a burst of deafening roars that echoed all around. The massive mechanical construct, its functions long since destroyed, along with the metal ground within a dozen meters. In the blink of an eye, it was completely swallowed by visible spatial fluctuations. Crackling, Wanda, who was desperately trying to suppress the Space Stone with her scarlet energy, staggered backward, the whole person flying backward. At a glance, clearly visible, terrifying scars rapidly covered every inch of her red nun armor. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The next second, a spatial portal, several meters in diameter, rapidly unfolded in the constantly twisting and vibrating air, slowly rotating inward. Immediately afterward, two tall figures, at least 3 meters in height, with burly and robust builds, gradually appeared within the scope of Doom and others' visors. At a glance, their exposed, blood-red, rough skin was covered with fine lines resembling ice cracks, and their dark, gleaming metal armor seemed to be telling everyone of the newcomers' terror and power. At this moment, before Doom and Jessica, who had just reacted, could launch a fierce attack against the unknown alien. The next second, another figure, smaller in stature, with a twisted and hunched back, wearing a silver mask and black robe, holding a golden, glittering jeweled scepter, slowly emerged behind the two tall aliens' burly bodies. There are still little bugs. Iron Blood brothers, what are you waiting for? Send them on their way. At this moment, a bloodless, pale hand was slowly extended by the black-robed figure wearing the silver mask. It grabbed the cosmic cube, which was emitting spatial fluctuations in midair, and then said in a hoarse voice to the tall, unknown alien. At this moment, as soon as the silver-masked, black-robed figure finished speaking, the two burly alien figures slightly shook their blood-red, round heads. The corners of their mouths, covered with ice crack patterns, simultaneously revealed a cruel and bloodthirsty grin. Iron Blood left, Iron Blood right, the Iron Blood brothers said in unison. Rumble, their 4 feet stomped hard on the ground, while creating small shockwaves on the ground. Their tall bodies, moving almost in unison, launched a sudden attack on Doom and the others at a terrifying speed that was difficult to capture with the naked eye. Bang! In an instant, accompanied by a dull, loud noise from a metal collision. Doom and Jessica, who had just tried to launch a charge, rolled violently backward into the passage. And in front of their 2 ceramite chestplates, almost in the blink of an eye, they were covered with terrifying fist marks that were several inches deep, and hideous cracks that spread everywhere. Jessica, take the unconscious Wanda and retreat first, immediately call for support from the base. At this moment, Doom, who was struggling to get up, shouted without turning his head. Kneeling on one knee, he fiercely waved his ceramite hand forward. A wave of incomparably scorching hellfire temporarily obscured the two tall aliens' vision and attack routes. Understood. At this moment, Jessica, who had just sat up from the ground, came to the side of the unconscious Wanda without any hesitation. She easily lifted the nun armor, which was not light in weight, and then turned her head to look in Doom's direction and shouted loudly. Doom, let's retreat together first. The Astartes and stormtroopers are on their way back, wait until the battle team is gathered before dealing with them. Jessica, neither of us can withstand them. Do you think the Astartes can deal with this kind of thing? Now someone must hold them back. We can't let the cosmic cube fall into the hands of these aliens. Stop talking nonsense and get out of here. Doom, whose dark green cloak fluttered in the wind, rose from the ground and slowly ascended into the air of the passage. A wave of hellfire, along with mysterious sorcery of considerable power, was continuously cast from his palm, rapidly covering the two tall figures who were easily stepping through the hellfire. At this moment, Jessica, gritting her teeth, turned her metal helmet and stared at the distant, small, hunched figure, as well as the alien Iron Blood brothers, whose strength and speed far exceeded them. She no longer hesitated and turned around. Carrying the unconscious Wanda in her palm, she sped deeper into the underground passage. Several kilometers outside of New York, beneath the clouds, inside the Thunderhawk transport, whose engines were constantly emitting a low rumble. The mechanical voice from Iron Man David interrupted Luo Shah's closed-eye meditation. My lord, approximately a dozen minutes ago, Doom and the others' communication signals were blocked and interfered with by something. I have already made numerous attempts, and have not been able to contact any of them. A small group of aliens plus a mortal agent, Jessica alone is enough to handle them, not to mention the existence of the Lamenters. They are all veterans in dealing with aliens. Luo Shah, his brow slightly furrowed, took a deep breath. He said in a low voice towards Iron Man David, I don't think there should be any problems. David, are there any special circumstances in New York? My lord, apart from routine shootings and robberies, nothing seems to have been discovered. Wait, what's going on? At this moment, Iron Man David's words, which had not yet finished, suddenly changed. Luo Shah, who reacted quickly, immediately activated his vibranium power armor and stepped forward, entering the interior of the cockpit. At this moment, through the wider field of vision inside the cockpit, he clearly saw that in the center of Manhattan Island, several kilometers away, an incomparably thick pillar of blue energy was rapidly rising into the sky. At the same time, a huge spatial portal, nearly 10 kilometers in diameter, slowly condensed in the sky above New York City. This is a spatial portal activated by the cosmic cube. Damn it, Doom's operation has probably gone through an unexpected deviation. David, if I'm not mistaken, this is probably the alien invasion I told you about. The large army of Chitauri aliens is here. Luo Shah, his eyes widened, slowly gritted his teeth. He issued a series of orderly commands to Iron Man David, who was close at hand. David, immediately contact Gemini Island base in Latveria. Let the Lamenters Company, Stormtrooper Company, and Thunderhawk Flight Squadron quickly assemble. Remember to notify Wong of the New York Sanctum. We need their mage portals to mobilize a large number of troops to the battlefield. Also, contact Tony and Thor of the Inquisition, and Rogers of S.H.I.E.L.D., these closest superheroes also need to get to work. As soon as Luo Shah's words fell, Iron Man David, his eye sockets flashing blue, unhesitatingly began a series of command releases and mobilizations. Immediately afterward, he also tacitly increased the engine power of the Thunderhawk transport to its limit, quickly sending the flying vehicle speeding towards the sky above Manhattan Island. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Luo Shah, driving the vibranium power armor, turned and walked towards the hatch door without any emotional changes. In fact, he had various plans in place for the arrival of the Chitauri. But the only thing he didn't expect was that the time and place for the alien invasion to begin would still be in New York. To know, in the original timeline, the culprits who led the New York invasion have been dead for many years. Those masterminds who started this alien invasion disaster, you better pray that my student and the Marshal of the Legion haven't died here, and that the number of human casualties doesn't exceed psychological expectations. Luo Shah took a deep breath and muttered to himself. He stood in front of the slowly opening hatch door, a vibranium hand clenching tightly at the strands of wind that suddenly swept across the power armor. The next second, the blood scythe from the simulator storage page suddenly appeared in his palm. Otherwise, I will take a lot of time to personally lead countless Astartes chapters and void fleets to visit your secret lairs. To carry out hundreds and thousands of times the revenge massacre for the human victims of this invasion war. Latveria, the garrison of the Defense Force Guard. As the urgent assembly whistle, sounding slightly shrill, gradually echoed throughout the night sky. Inside the brightly lit base, one by one, the solemn-faced mortal warriors of the defense force rushed out of the barracks in an orderly manner. Well trained, they arrived at their respective posts and immediately began pre-war preparations without any hesitation. Before long, a series of Thunderhawk transports, re-examined by mortal technicians, were pushed out of the spacious hangar by automated servitors acting as towing vehicles, and placed one by one on the parking platform. In the next moment, the entire company of Lamenters Astartes, clad in black and white power armor, carrying a large number of ammunition supply boxes, appeared at the edge of the platform. And many heavy firepower weapons, such as automatic cannons, storm bolters, and even whirlwind missile launchers, were quickly loaded into the cabins by automated servitors. At this moment, in front of a row of officer dormitories not far from the parking platform, a young officer, whose military uniform was distinctly different from that of the Defense Force Guard, was intently watching the Defense Force Guard conducting pre-war mobilization. His name was Zemo, a major in rank, from the unknown small country of Sokovia. He was also a friendly army officer who had come to Latveria for study and observation. Just then, a Defense Force Guard staff officer, arriving in a hurry, exchanged a few simple greetings with Major Zemo. The general meaning of his words was that he might not be able to take care of him in the recent period, and hoped for his understanding. And Major Zemo, also a professional soldier, while gazing at the large number of troops rapidly assembling, asked the other party half-jokingly, "Could it be that the terrifying monsters from those archive files have descended and invaded again?" The Defense Force staff officer, grinning, shook his head. He turned his head and glanced at the Astartes who were quickly running towards the Thunderhawk transport formation. Trying his best not to violate military discipline, he told Major Zemo beside him about the news of the alien invasion. And just as Major Zemo, with wide eyes, exclaimed that the world was changing too fast, on the open space of the platform not far from them, a series of teleportation gates, sputtering sparks, slowly appeared in the field of vision. In the next second, one by one, burly figures wearing black metal armor covered with various mysterious runes, carrying various melee weapons on their backs, quickly stepped out of the interior of the teleportation gates. At this moment, Major Zemo, with a puzzled look, had not yet reacted. The Defense Force staff officer, with his eyebrows raised, subconsciously let out a cry of surprise. Ah, could these be the legendary librarians? I have only seen fragmented internal information introducing them before, but I have never seen them appear. I'm sorry, friend, I have to report to the command post. If even the Librarian Corps are dispatched, then this battle, even with the entire company of Astartes, I'm afraid it won't be much easier. Before the other party's voice faded, the whole person sprinted along the road towards the direction of the command post without looking back. And Major Zemo, once again widening his eyes, took a deep breath. He slowly performed a standard Aquila salute towards the other party's gradually blurred figure. For humanity, for Rorschach, Northern Europe, on the golden beach occupied by hundreds of people, the last rays of the setting sun were constantly radiating the earth, bringing the last suitable temperature to everything. And Thor, the god of thunder, leaning in a plastic deck chair, was enjoying the loving feeding from his girlfriend Jane. One by one, fresh and juicy tropical fruits were constantly stuffed into his mouth. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just then, a silver metal ring on Thor's right wrist gradually began to vibrate violently. In the next second, before Thor could move his gaze away from his girlfriend's charming facial curves, the mechanical voice from Iron Man David clearly echoed around. And he only listened to Iron Man David briefly describe the current situation. The relaxed and contented expression on Thor's face instantly vanished. He turned his head and gave his girlfriend an apologetic look. Then, with agile movements, he leapt up from the beach deck chair. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Thor, with a solemn expression, casually raised a palm. Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, buried inside the beach sand, quickly broke through the shackles of the ground and flew into the other party's palm. Rumble, and as the thick clouds gradually swirling over the sky, as well as the continuous muffled thunder. A set of lightning-flashing magical armor had quickly condensed on the towering body of Thor, the god of thunder. But what was even more unexpected was, at the moment when Thor, the god of thunder, successfully transformed, the Golden Beach, originally full of hustle and bustle, instantly quieted down. Every burly man subconsciously ended whatever they were doing. Without any hesitation, they knelt on one knee in the direction of Thor, the god of thunder, quickly lowering their heads. Midgard is in trouble. The request for help from Roche's brothers has arrived. Warriors of the Asgardian Legion, take up your longswords, put on your armor. Now, attack with me. American West Coast. Inside the Inquisition base, which was still under vigorous construction, Tony, with a frown, was using Jarvis's control. Gazing at the alien armies constantly rushing out of the huge teleportation gates from the virtual projection in front of him. When he saw a huge, whale-like void mechanical behemoth smashing half a building to pieces. Open black lens bracket. The problem of slow updates in new chapters is being addressed. Close black lens bracket. Inquisition, assemble. At this moment, Tony's voice had just fallen. A teleportation gate, sputtering sparks, quickly appeared behind him. Immediately afterwards, a tall figure, draped in a red magical artifact cloak on his shoulders and wearing black rune armor, stepped out of the teleportation gate. I am Dr. Strange, a member of Rorschach. Mr. Stark, please come with me as soon as possible. Above the bustling streets of New York City, countless panicked ordinary citizens are constantly emitting ear-piercing screams and shouts. They are frantically running towards what they perceive as safe locations within their line of sight. However, most people are blasted into drifting charcoal powder by countless Chitauri infantry using laser energy rifles. At this moment, vehicles randomly abandoned by the crowd are clogging the center of every road. In the next moment, these vehicles are either collided with and exploded by subsequent out-of-control vehicles, falling into burning self-destruction, or torn into metallic fragments flying all over the sky by the heavy firepower from the Chitauri hovering chariots. At the same time, those ordinary mortals who simply do not have time to dodge are also torn apart by the metal fragments. Dong dong dong. Just then, accompanied by a series of extremely heavy footsteps, a tall figure with an incredibly tattered dark green cloak behind him. Even a left arm has disappeared, and he staggers, driving a power armor on the verge of damage, running towards the interior of a less crowded street. This is Doom, who has just experienced a difficult battle. At present, the medical life support system inside the power armor has been activated for a long time. Several liquefied panaceas have also been completely injected into his body. However, the regeneration potion, which has repeatedly repaired damaged organs and even missing limbs, has brought a greater burden to Doom, who only has a mortal physique. Now Doom's flesh and blood body can no longer bear the overbearing medicinal effects of the panacea. His thoughts are slightly blurred and confused, and he even regrets not having listened to Red Richards' small suggestion in the past, which was to inject a dose of super soldier serum to improve his physical fitness. After all, even the regenerative ability given to the human body by the panacea needs to abide by the law of conservation of energy. Healing injuries is actually consuming a lot of life force from one's own cells, not restoring from nothing. Boom boom boom. At this moment, a Chitauri infantry-controlled hovering chariot quickly swept over Doom's head. He took a deep breath, desperately swallowed the blood in his mouth. Inside that palm that was suddenly raised towards the air, hellfire summoned by witchcraft completely ignited several Chitauri infantry on the hovering chariot. Rumble. In an instant, the burning alien corpse, which let out a final painful roar, and the out-of-control hovering chariot heavily crossed the air, and after falling to the ground, triggered a more intense collision and explosion. However, at this time, Doom, who took another deep breath, did not relax in the slightest. He suddenly drove the dilapidated power armor and turned around, and the scanning function inside the helmet visor also quickly started working. The Blood Brothers think you have performed well. The Blood Brothers want you to offer your submission, because the Blood Brothers do not yet have a slave of the human race. At this moment, two tall figures with almost identical walking steps and even shoulder-shaking ranges slowly appeared in the central position of the street. The terrifying alien named Blood Brothers showed a ferocious smile on their blood-red faces covered with ice cracks, and said to Doom not far away in overlapping voices. Behind the thick armor on the opponent's waist, several broken heads belonging to stormtroopers and Astartes are constantly dripping drops of viscous blood onto the ground. for this kind of native alien elite with extremely strong individual combat power. Ordinary Astartes simply cannot deal with them. Only combat squads with a large amount of heavy firepower have a few chances of success. Chi chi chi. In the next second, Doom, who was not moved by the alien's remarks at all, quickly waved his only remaining ceramic steel palm. Incomparably scorching hellfire continuously bombarded the direction of the Blood Brothers. However, the Blood Brothers, whose physical fitness was extremely amazing, did not take any defensive measures against this. They allowed the hellfire that could easily melt metal to fall on their burly bodies. However, just as Doom was planning to take the opportunity to escape from this place, inside an abandoned vehicle not far from him, a young child who seemed to have just woken up from a dream was sobbing softly while holding a rabbit doll. That's bad. At this moment, Doom, whose thinking and reaction became active, indeed saw a more ferocious and cruel smile appear on the blood-red faces of the Blood Brothers. Immediately afterwards, the two burly aliens were like steel trains that suddenly started. Their huge feet stomped hard on the street surface. Without any hesitation, they launched a terrifyingly fast charge towards the location of the young child. Dong dong dong. At this moment, Doom didn't even have time to think too much. He immediately drove the dilapidated power armor with his instinctive reaction. The invisible telekinetic power constantly pouring out of his body had already pulled open the metal door of the abandoned vehicle, and dragged out the young child who subconsciously widened his eyes. But, when Doom firmly held the pale-faced young child with his only remaining hand, the Blood Brothers, who were rushing forward at full speed, suddenly changed their direction of attack. Four hard fists that were enough to penetrate ceramic steel armor slammed down on Doom's body. In an instant, Doom, who didn't have time to make many reactions, unhesitatingly hugged the young child with a pale face in front of his broken breastplate. The magnetic boots under his feet twisted hard, driving the entire body to rotate rapidly. He actually chose to directly expose the vital position of the power backpack to the Blood Brothers. Buzz buzz buzz. In the blink of an eye, accompanied by a buzzing vibration as a vector engine suddenly cut through the air. Metal 10 rings, each filled with purple energy, bombarded the huge bodies of the Blood Brothers one after another like cannonballs that had just been fired, completely blasting the two of them away while rolling. At the same time, Luo Sha's vibranium magnetic boots stepped on two metal 10 rings. The whole person fell heavily on the street surface like a savior angel descending to earth, and the powerful impact immediately set off countless smoke, dust, and gravel around. Damn aliens, your opponent is me. Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, turned his head and stared at Doom, who was seriously injured. He took a deep breath and then looked at the Blood Brothers who were rolling over and jumping up from the pit on the ground, and shouted in a deep voice. Dong dong dong. As Luo Sha gradually clenched the blood scythe surrounded by green light in his palm, he desperately drove the vibranium power armor, and surrounded by rapidly rotating metal 10 rings all over his body, he crashed head-on into the Blood Brothers who were also launching a charge. Rumble. In an instant, a series of shock waves that were almost visible to the naked eye suddenly erupted between the two sides who collided fiercely. In the next moment, one of the Blood Brothers was suddenly blasted away by Luo Sha's vibranium iron fist that condensed power. And the other huge Blood Brother was actually completely split in two along with the heavy armor on his body by the blood scythe that was slashed diagonally because of slipping under his feet. Ah, the Blood Brother is dead. The Blood Brother wants to tear you apart. As the tall corpse of the unlucky alien crashed to the ground, the angry roar from the last blood-colored alien almost enveloped the surrounding streets. However, Luo Sha, with an expressionless face, just waved his hand casually. Metal 10 rings, each emitting a terrifying scream, suddenly unleashed a metal spiral storm that was almost like slow slicing on the tall alien not far away. Die, swoosh, 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 accompanied by continuous booming sounds. Centered around the Stark Tower, with its distinctive architectural style, Iron Legion armors of various shapes and functions either unleashed a barrage of micro-missiles from the ground, or scattered impact beams in midair, cutting through enemy flying vehicles. Even some larger and bulkier mechanical armors, under the meticulous control of Jarvis, temporarily became iron walls for many ordinary people, defending against the frenzied attacks of the Chidori infantry. Chiz, chiz, chiz. Just then, in the midair about several hundred meters above the ground, rings of large teleportation portals, sparking with fire, gradually appeared. The next second, Thunderhawk transports, each equipped with a turbine laser cannon and twin-linked heavy bolters, rapidly burst out with roaring engines. Like large flocks of birds, they rushed out from the inside of the portals. Instantly, countless Chidori hovercrafts wreaking havoc in the city's sky became the designated sacrifices for the Thunderhawk flying squadron's debut. A large number of hovercrafts exploded in midair, turning into clusters of metal fragments and showers of blood, pouring down onto the war-torn city streets. Immediately afterwards, some Thunderhawk transports, controlled by the cogitator system, slightly tilted their massive metal hulls. The unmanned flying vehicles, constantly unleashing powerful suppressive fire, quickly became the best targets to attract the Chidori flying leviathans. At the same time, as the other Thunderhawk transports slowly opened their cargo bay doors and rapidly decreased their altitude. One by one, towering figures clad in ironclad pattern Terminator power armor, wielding autocannons or storm bolters, quickly jumped out of the cargo bay and landed heavily on the street ground. Boom, 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 accompanied by a burst of sudden bolter fire. These Astartes, with their incredibly tacit combat coordination, acted without any hesitation. Each combat squad performed its own duty. The heavy weapons squad vigorously propelled their power armor forward. They relied on the heavy firepower mounted in their palms to clear out all the Chidori infantry within their visor's range. While more assault squads advanced under the cover of terrifying firepower, they raised the storm bolters in their palms, blasting apart a large number of Chidori hovercrafts flying back and forth overhead. At the same time, they launched rescue operations towards many ordinary civilians trapped inside the dilapidated buildings. Chiz, chiz, chiz. Just then, on several street grounds not far from the first batch of spatial teleportation portals. More spatial teleportation portals, sparking with fire, also successively emerged in the air. The next second, a line of massive and bulky rhino-armored personnel carriers, and a small number of Land Raider vehicle units, led by a Crusader pattern Land Raider, slowly drove out from the inside of the portals. Immediately afterwards, countless Imperial Guard troopers wearing green carapace armor and wielding lasguns, marched with unified and firm steps, quickly appearing behind the heavy vehicles. And as the orders to establish defensive positions and gradually advance, as well as to rescue ordinary civilians as much as possible, were issued. One by one, the heavy vehicles, with engines roaring ferociously, immediately lined up in a row. Leading a large number of Imperial Guard troopers, they launched a continuous line of battle advancement along the layout of the city streets. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The next second, the whirlwind missile launchers mounted on top of the rhino-armored personnel carriers and Land Raiders gradually became a powerful weapon to obstruct those Chidori flying leviathans and large numbers of Chidori infantry. One by one, the rapidly ascending whirlwind missiles drew clearly visible scorching trails in the air. Subsequently, they quickly exploded into clusters of explosive firelight covering the ground. Chiz, chiz, chiz. And just as the Imperial Guard troopers and the Lamenter's company, who had arrived at the city battlefield, were launching a terrifying counterattack against the Chidori aliens, a solitary spatial teleportation portal suddenly appeared above the rooftop platform of a building. Immediately afterwards, a dozen or so figures, who were more like wearing streamlined power armor than mechanical armor, successively stepped out from the depths of the portal. Subsequently, they either leapt down towards the edge of the platform relying on their own superpowers, or, using the mechanical armor's own thrusters, soared into the air and quickly joined the chaotic battlefield not far away. And this was clearly Tony leading the Inquisitorial Psychers to join this large-scale war against the alien invasion. "Doctor Strange, aren't you coming along?" At this moment, Tony, who was processing a large amount of data information, while coordinating a series of Iron Man David's orders, slightly spared a few thoughts. He quickly asked Strange, who was standing beside him, "The safety of the Sanctum Sanctorum is far more important than the existence of a city. It is one of the magical defense nodes covering the entire Terra. If it is unfortunately destroyed by the Chidori, I'm afraid more than just the mortals in the city will die." Strange, with a calm expression, turned his head and stared at the Thunderhawk flying squadron, which was engaged in low-altitude dogfights with many Chidori flying leviathans. He replied to Tony's direction with a solemn tone. "That's good, you go defend that Sanctum Sanctorum thing as soon as possible. If you need the support of the Inquisition, feel free to ask. All right, see you later, strange friend." The next moment, accompanied by batches of medical drone swarms flying out of the spatial teleportation portal, Tony, nodding heavily, waved to the other party without turning his head. Then, he quickly manipulated the mechanical armor, which was much more advanced than before, and began to fly at extreme speed towards the Stark Tower. May the power of the Emperor protect you, heroes who fight for humanity. Strange stared at the other party's gradually receding figure. He muttered to himself. The next second, the red levitating cloak draped over his shoulders gently patted his cheek. Immediately afterwards, it wrapped Strange's entire body and quickly flew towards the inside of the portal. Ah! In an instant, the tall alien, heavily wrapped by the terrifying spiral storm formed by the metal 10 rings, could not help but let out an extremely miserable painful howl. Chiz, chiz, chiz. A series of low humming sounds, like a meat grinder spinning rapidly, gradually resounded throughout the street. About a dozen meters later, Rorschach, with a cold expression, once again waved the vibranium palm of his gauntlet. And as the spiral storm dissipated without any hesitation, countless viscous pieces of flesh, along with fine bone fragments, were very evenly distributed above the ground of dozens of meters in radius. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Rorschach, who had just destroyed the powerful alien blood brothers, seemed to have only completed a simple daily task. He drove the vibranium power armor and walked to Doom's side. How is it, Doom? Is the consequence of disobeying orders fun? If you had followed David's plan to execute this mission before, why would you have suffered such serious injuries? Rorschach, squinting slightly, stared at Doom, who was sitting paralyzed on the ground, and looked at the young child who was trembling in the other's arms, and continued to ask in a low voice. Where are Jessica and Wanda? At this moment, Doom, hearing Rorschach's words, reached out and took off the metal helmet covered with battle damage marks. He slowly raised his slightly pale face, smiled bitterly and said, I temporarily separated from them in order to hold the line and delay time. I'm sorry, Lord Rorschach, I am not a qualified commander. And Rorschach, with a strong attitude, interrupted Doom's words without hesitation. He slightly turned his gaze, staring towards those spatial teleportation portals that were gradually emerging in midair in the distance, and then asked Doom in a deep voice. Now is not the time for you to reflect. Can you continue to fight? If not, I'll have David send someone to take you back to Gemini Island base for treatment. Give me some time to catch my breath. I can barely continue to fight, Lord Rorschach. In addition to the pair of powerful aliens named Blood Brothers, there is also a silver-masked black-robed man who is good at manipulating illusion magic and mind control who has also descended on Earth. It was even him who summoned these alien armies using large teleportation portals activated by cosmic magic. Hey, illusions and mind control. I see. Perhaps this is an old friend I haven't seen in a long time. Rorschach, his eyebrows twitching slightly, subconsciously let out a low chuckle. He took a deep breath and muttered to himself. It doesn't matter, this time I will tear the other party into pieces completely. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. If it is said that before the arrival of the Astartes Company and the National Guard's armored forces, the mortals in New York City could not see any hope of resisting the Chitauri invasion. Then, with the actions of the Lamenters to save civilians, and the most famous superhero Iron Man joining the battlefield, the panicked mortals of the past seemed to gradually break away from their initial state of fear and calm down. Under the leadership of many Inquisition heroes or valiant mortals, they began to spontaneously form groups to help the National Guard soldiers rescue and evacuate more civilians, and even take on the responsibility of transporting ammunition and supplies. And what was most surprising was that, even though the official forces in the city, such as the upper echelons of the police bureau and other security systems, had disappeared, leading to only a small number of police officers with enthusiasm and justice trying to resist the Chitauri's ravages. Some nameless super-villains previously hidden in the crowd, or super-powered individuals who had never revealed their abilities, seemed to be infected by the emotions of countless mortals' deaths and the brave fighting of the combat troops. They used their special abilities to join the battle against the alien invasion. In fact, these unknown small villains or super-powered individuals had never truly faced a formed alien army. Even though the Chitauri's level of organization could not be compared to Rock's elite troops at all, it was completely dog shit. However, it was more than enough to crush these young super-powered individuals who were stepping onto the battlefield for the first time. Therefore, Most of the super-powered individuals and nameless villains basically lost their lives in the first encounter. However, perhaps endless suffering and life and death can wash away the will of mankind, and the times also create more heroes. After experiencing several terrifying crises on the edge of life and death, many of the surviving small villains and super-powered individuals unexpectedly developed their own guerrilla warfare tactics. Their goal also shifted from resisting the alien invasion to focusing on not necessarily annihilating the Chitauri aliens. Even causing some degree of trouble to the enemy's battle line would be enough. This was enough to create more offensive opportunities for the Metal Giants or the National Guard, who were suppressing the aliens with heavy firepower. Not long ago, Tony, who was dodging the attacks of floating chariots in midair, accidentally discovered these brave individuals who had just experienced life and death. He immediately ordered Jarvis to mobilize a batch of medical drone swarms to distribute to these people, and also temporarily incorporated them into the Inquisition's command channel, trying to maximize the use of these super-powered individuals. Soon after, the National Guard's urban advancement tactics played a significant role. It also greatly compressed the combat area of most Chitauri aliens, which almost covered most of Manhattan Island. And as more mortal civilians were evacuated to places outside the defense line, or deeper into safer underground civil defense works, the Lamenters, who no longer needed to save mortals, seemed to completely let go. Slowly driving their Terminator power armor, they relied on a constant stream of terrifying firepower to cleanly sweep away any ugly aliens within their line of sight. Unfortunately, as time went by, the large space portal continuously opening in the sky above New York was constantly transporting more Chitauri infantry or even more terrifying flying behemoths from the mothership deep in the universe. Even a kind of violent living weapon appeared on the battlefield, which was the Chitauri giant ape whose size was comparable to the Terminator. And similar living weapons can only rely on the terrifying firepower of the Astartes or heavy vehicles, otherwise it would require several superheroes to repeatedly cooperate and cautiously attack to gradually eliminate the same threat. Rumble. At this moment, a relatively large, dazzling rainbow beam of light that crashed into the center of the dilapidated street quickly attracted the attention of the entire battlefield. In the next second, groups of Asgardian soldiers wearing ancient golden armor, holding heavy shields and melee weapons, appeared in everyone's field of vision in neat steps. Asgard, attack! Along with a roar that spread to more than a dozen city blocks and countless thick clouds gathering overhead. A large number of Asgardian legions launched a charge attack. Thor, wrapped in strands of lightning all over his body, had just stepped out of the range of the Rainbow Bridge. His entire person was like a suddenly activated cruise missile, rushing towards those huge flying beasts that were entangled back and forth with the lightning hawk flying formation. In an instant, the terrifying damage brought by the unparalleled physical strength and Mjolnir's thunder magic. At least 3 flying behemoths that did not have time to swim away and dodge completely lost their breath, and then crashed heavily towards the large buildings on the ground. 4. Why are you only here now? The latest order, David wants you to go and see what is happening in the area below that portal. If we don't close the portal, I'm afraid the number of these aliens will never end. We may need to carry out a decapitation tactic to end this invasion battle as soon as possible. I actually miss Roche a little now. If he were here, he would probably have grabbed the mastermind's head and kicked it as a ball. At this moment, Tony, who was controlling the mechanical armor to make a big circle, shouted loudly towards Thor in midair. By the way, Thor, there's one more thing. The tech wristband that Redditus and I designed for you is for you to use for communication and to receive orders. I'll repeat it again, remember to listen to orders. Don't just focus on slaughtering aliens. As soon as Tony's voice fell, he immediately controlled the mechanical armor to launch beams of light towards the airspace in front of him. In the blink of an eye, he destroyed a Chitauri floating chariot that was planning to launch a surprise attack on him. However, at this time, a Chitauri floating chariot rising obliquely from the ground at a near-limit frenzied speed. While firing extremely hot laser beams, it launched a suicidal sneak attack on Tony, who was in midair. Rumble. In the next second, before Tony, wearing the mechanical armor, could choose to counterattack or dodge, the tall figure flashing with lightning smashed the Chitauri floating chariot with physical strength far exceeding that of the Astartes. Hey, Tony, don't just show off your words, be careful and cautious on the battlefield, pay attention to observing the environment. Thor, with Mjolnir's thunder shining brightly in his palm, shouted loudly towards Tony's direction. And Tony, who once again focused his attention back on the battlefield, did not hesitate to raise a steel middle finger at Thor. "Ha, then I have to thank you. That is, a shield Quinjet." Dong, dong, dong. Two vibranium magnetic boots repeatedly stomped on the street surface, which was covered with explosion cracks. The power from the tyrannical body also drove the vibranium power armor to quickly speed forward. Soon after, the whistling sound of engines gradually approached from the air above. Without turning his head, Luo Sha immediately threw the metal 10 rings surrounding him backward one by one. In the blink of an eye, a dozen Chidori hovercrafts, thinking Luo Sha was weaker alone, were forcibly pierced into countless fragments, and then heavily landed on the street, triggering a series of explosions and flames. And Luo Sha's forward pace did not stop in the slightest. At the same time, he also scanned the scene ahead a few more times, secretly pondering the route he should choose next. At this moment, he was already very close to the energy beam that always led to the large portal. Luo Sha could even clearly see with his naked eyes. Dozens of flying behemoths repeatedly circling around the energy beam were constantly defending against the firepower bombardment from the Thunderhawk flying squadron on the area below the portal. In fact, if it weren't for the large portal constantly providing large-scale reinforcements to the Chidori invasion force, commanded by Iron Man David, who oversaw the overall situation, the National Defense Force Guards, constantly compressing the Chidori's living space, and the Astartes Terminator Company, like small tanks, could quickly annihilate all these alien invaders of Earth. Even so, the overall development of the battlefield had long been on the side of humanity. As for the complete failure of the Chidori, it was only a matter of time. Just at this moment, Luo Sha, who was striding forward, suddenly stopped. His beastly senses, which had almost become a combat instinct, made him vaguely aware of something unusual. In the next second, he swung the blood scythe in his palm without any hesitation. And just between the broken streets a few meters away from him, a Chidori giant ape, originally in a transparent, invisible state, had to reveal its tall figure from a layer of constantly shaking and oscillating green light curtain. Invisible illusion. It seems that there are still ambushes and traps set by the other party in the surrounding environment. Luo Sha, who subconsciously narrowed his eyes, swept the blood scythe across again without any hesitation. In just one strike, the sharp edge with its hazy green light completely cut the attacking Chidori giant ape in half. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just at this moment, Luo Sha, who vaguely heard the sound of the wind in his ears, raised a vibranium arm without hesitation. The vibranium iron fist, quickly clenched into a fist, immediately punched out into the air beside him. Thump, with the terrifying loud noise of metal colliding. Another Chidori giant ape, which had been successfully blasted out of its invisible illusion, fell heavily backward onto the street surface without any ability to resist. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Luo Sha quickly drove the vibranium power armor to launch a charge forward. As the magnetic boots under his feet moved, the shadow step, which was more skilled and powerful than in the past, was also quietly unleashed. In the blink of an eye, Luo Sha transformed into a black phantom that cut through the air. And Luo Sha, who once again revealed his tall figure, heavily landed on the chest of the Chidori giant ape. And before the roaring Chidori giant ape could raise its hand to counterattack, a high-raised magnetic boot forcefully shattered the opponent's entire head. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At the same time, Luo Sha, who quickly scanned the surrounding environment, casually pulled out the heart of the forge from the power armor's waist. He actually chose to close his eyes and pull the trigger based on the combat instinct brought by his beastly senses. Chi, chi, chi. In an instant, blue plasma spheres that roared out of the muzzle continuously expanded and exploded along the trajectory of the shot, and quickly formed a terrifying plasma tide that constantly spread and expanded in a range of hundreds of meters. Roar. At this moment, Chidori giant apes, who did not have time to dodge, were forced out of their invisible illusions by the terrifying tide formed by the scorching plasma, and then became handfuls of ash flying all over the sky. Soon after, Luo Sha, who basically could not detect anything unusual, stopped shooting. He suddenly opened his closed eyes. His deep voice shouted loudly towards the broken street covered with ash. "There's no need to waste your manpower to continue probing. I know you must be around. Come out, Loki." At this moment, as Luo Sha's words continued to drift over the empty street, a cold voice, seemingly filled with hatred, quickly transmitted to Luo Sha's ears a few seconds later. I finally found you. Do you know how much I missed you when I was suffering these years? I can't wait to eat the flesh on your body. Extract every bone in your body. Along with a street illusion composed of a layer of green light curtains slowly receding. A black-robed man with a silver mask on his face and a twisted spine gradually appeared in Luo Sha's field of vision. And behind the other party's short figure, teams of Chidori infantry, completely deprived of their minds, were marching in neat steps on the street. They quickly raised their laser energy guns and firmly locked onto the tall figure in front. Is this the trump card you plan to use against me? It's really disappointing. Loki, it seems that last time I didn't completely crush your entire head, but instead gave you a chance to continue to survive. Don't worry, this time I will definitely work hard to grind you to ashes. Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, stared blankly at the black-robed Loki holding the Mind Scepter. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the blood scythe in his palm and said to the other party in a calm tone. Heh, Luo Sha, you can try. In my opinion, you are just a tiny insect hiding in Midgard and enjoying the protection of others. Perhaps your individual combat power is a bit stronger, but your vision is like a frog in a well. Speaking of which, I still have to thank you. If it weren't for you, how could I have survived so luckily in the depths of the universe, and even seen those more great ancient beings? Now, do you think you can rely on those mortal troops to match the Chidori fleet under my control? I might as well tell you, Earth has become my possession, and the failure of humanity is imminent. Unfortunately, the black-robed Loki, whose thinking was somewhat insane, was not easily provoked by Luo Sha's sarcastic words. He spoke unhurriedly while taking off the silver mask on his face. In the next second, a pale and gaunt face appeared in Luo Sha's field of vision. And Luo Sha stared at the metal skull above the other party's forehead, which was almost half occupied by Uru metal. He couldn't help but sneer at the other party and said, Loki, Loki, is it so comfortable to be a discarded pawn for the mad titan Thanos, to become an iron-headed dog under someone else's command? If you had some backbone and pride before, then now, I'm afraid you don't even have basic dignity. I really feel disappointed in you for Thor. Shut up for me. This time, Luo Sha's words seemed to have stimulated the black-robed Loki's reverse scale. His pale face instantly turned red, and he even couldn't help but let out a sharp roar. However, just as the angry black-robed Loki was about to wave the Mind Scepter and command the Chidori troops behind him to launch a fierce attack. Rumble, along with the whistling sounds and bursts of thunder constantly ringing in the air. A tall figure, wrapped in wisps of lightning all over his body, suddenly flew over the heads of the crowd. Then, the whole person, wrapped in the sound of thunder, heavily landed beside Luo Sha. Loki, you're still alive. At this moment, Thor, his face displaying a hint of shock, stared at the hunched figure of Loki in black robes. He subconsciously let out a cry of surprise. However, Loki in black robes, his eyes filled with hatred but also seeming to flash with a complex emotion, offered no verbal expression. He merely waved the Mind Stone scepter in his palm forcefully. In the next second, the thousands of Chidori infantry behind him immediately launched a covering laser barrage towards Luo Sha and Thor. Swish, swish, swish. Instantly, accompanied by scorching lasers grazing the vibranium-powered armor. Luo Sha, raising his hand to recall the metal 10 rings into a spiral storm, drove his heavy magnetic boots without hesitation. He gripped the blood scythe in his palm tightly. He launched a terrifying charge towards the numerous Chidori infantry and the hunched figure attempting to conceal his presence again with illusions. Meanwhile, Thor, after the initial shock, seemed to enter a state of unparalleled rage. As Mjolnir, the thunder god's hammer, suddenly extended towards the sky above, it unleashed an even more dazzling and terrifying lightning. Bolts of brilliant lightning, summoned continuously by Thor, crashed down heavily upon the fragile bodies of countless Chidori infantry. Immediately following, Thor, striding forward, charged into the attacking ranks of the Chidori infantry like a human bulldozer. Enveloped in wisps of lightning from head to toe, he forcefully swept away all alien enemies daring to stand in his path. He even charged ferociously towards the location where Loki in black robes had just vanished. It was as if only through this method could Thor completely vent the complex emotions that were utterly impossible to release from the depths of his heart. Loki of the past was the own brother who had accompanied Thor through countless years. But the present Midgard was also the second home that Thor wanted to protect. Because here were his brothers and friends, and also the lover he missed most. Those mortals who revered and loved him for his heroic deeds should not have to endure the suffering they were currently facing. Moreover, Loki's return and invasion of Midgard with the Chitauri army was an egregious act that could not be excused by any means. Even if Thor, feeling a pang of reluctance, chose to show mercy, Luo Sha, Tony, and the others would not allow a culprit capable of threatening the safety of Earth to continue living. Therefore, Thor's final affection for his own brother was to choose to kill him with his own hands. Loki, accompanied by a terrifying thunder that almost enveloped the entire battlefield. Thor, wielding the thunder god's hammer to fight against the Chitauri infantry, let out a deafening roar of anger. Almost simultaneously, Luo Sha, driving the vibranium-powered armor to charge forward, also used the metal 10 rings and the blood scythe to engage in a very difficult and fierce battle with Loki in black robes, who was temporarily unable to easily escape. Chirp, chirp, chirp. The green light-entwined blood scythe swiftly slashed across the hunched figure of Loki in black robes. But in the next second, the sudden shattering of the green illusion proved that it was just a lifelike illusory figure. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Pieces of rubble and metal fragments that instantly rose from the surrounding ground launched a continuous barrage towards Luo Sha's tall figure like cannonballs. Luo Sha, fearless, merely used the rotating metal 10 rings to defend the area of his head, which was not wearing a helmet. Subsequently, he immediately used the combat instinct brought by his beast senses. For the first time, he located Loki in black robes, who had just concealed his hunched figure on the chaotic battlefield. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, unhesitatingly used Shadow Step. His entire person instantly transformed into a wraith-like dark shadow and landed beside Loki in black robes. After the two magnetic boots barely touched the ground, the rapidly dancing blood scythe had already slashed down like a sudden flash of lightning. Crack. Unfortunately, along with the sudden shattering of pieces of green light illusion, this turned out to be another false figure released by Loki in black robes. Just as Luo Sha was quickly scanning his surroundings, wanting to find the other party's true body as soon as possible, strands of bright yellow, slender energy quietly spread towards Luo Sha's head. At this moment, Luo Sha, who instantly felt his mind being invaded by another will, immediately stomped on the ground, accompanied by particles of broken stones that suddenly splashed out in all directions. Luo Sha, widening his eyes sharply, let out a terrifying roar of nearly a scream. Still want to control me? Get out of my head. Just at this moment, Luo Sha, who keenly captured a trace of blurred air vibration in the corner of his eye, unhesitatingly activated the vibranium-powered armor. Relying on his willpower to resist the mental intrusion, he forcefully raised his thick arm, which was tightly gripping the blood scythe. He slashed down fiercely towards the direction where Loki in black robes was suspected to be located. Crack, accompanied by a subtle sound of metal breaking. The Mind Stone scepter, which had just collided with the blood scythe, was instantly split in two by the sharp blade. This is impossible. At this moment, Loki in black robes, forced to reveal his hunched figure, subconsciously let out a cry filled with shock. Luo Sha, who was suddenly driving the vibranium-powered armor to step forward, had already once again brandished the blood scythe in his palm. In the next second, even though Loki in black robes, having reacted, quickly cast one lifelike false illusion after another around his body in an attempt to confuse Luo Sha, the blood scythe, which suddenly swept across, still completely split the other party's hunched figure in half. Thump. Instantly, the incomplete upper body of Loki in black robes fell heavily to the ground. Uncontrollable ice blue blood kept pouring out of his mouth, and one of his hands still subconsciously clutched half of the Mind Stone scepter, which had suffered the same fate. Brother Luo Sha, let me do it. Just at this moment, before Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, could raise the blood scythe in his palm again and directly chop off the broken head of Loki in black robes. A low voice from Thor, the thunder god, quickly transmitted to his ears. Luo Sha slightly raised his eyebrows, but he still chose to lower the blood scythe in his palm. It's okay, it's all the same whoever does it. Thor, the thunder god, who had just killed all the nearby Chitauri infantry by summoning a large amount of terrifying lightning, slowly came to Luo Sha's side. At this moment, Thor, trying his best to suppress the anger and sadness that kept surging up, looked down at his former brother with a stiff tone and said, "Loki, do you even know what you've done? Why should the mortals of Midgard pay the price of their lives for your wild ambitions? Ah, Thor, stop putting on that hypocritical act, pretending to be merciful. You're just like before, habitually enjoying the reverence and love of others, playing the hero. Loki in black robes, with ice-blue blood constantly flowing from his mouth and nose, used all his strength to prop up his remaining upper body. He stared at Thor and Rorschach with a twisted and ferocious expression and said, I just realized that, compared to the intense resentment towards Rorschach because I'm inferior in skill, my hatred for you, Thor, truly comes from the depths of my heart. Moreover, do you think that killing me and ending that portal will end this invasion? Keep dreaming. Before long, a large fleet of Chitauri will arrive on Earth. Although they follow my commands, their most important mission is to seize the Infinity Stones for that mad titan. And you insects, who can't even easily leave Earth, can only watch helplessly as your home is completely destroyed by even more Chitauri. Ha ha ha, just thinking about it makes me want to burst out laughing. After all, the whole world will have to be buried with me, which is. At this moment, before Loki in black robes, whose expression was becoming increasingly ferocious, could finish speaking. A scorching plasma ball that suddenly spewed out of the muzzle of a gun and a terrifying lightning bolt that descended from the sky instantly converged on the half of Loki in black robes' body. And completely blasted the other party into evaporated blue gas, leaving not even a trace of ashes behind. Rorschach, squinting his eyes, and Thor, the thunder god, with a solemn expression, glanced at each other subconsciously. The two of them shook their heads at each other at the same time. Dong, dong, dong. With a calm expression, Rogel Dorn drove the vibranium-powered armor forward. Kneeling on one knee, he leaned slightly and picked up the Mind Stone scepter, which had been forcibly cleaved in two by the blood scythe, from the devastated ground. Looking around, at the top of the slightly curved, broken scepter. A blue gem, only the size of a chicken egg, shimmering with a faint blue light, seemed to be constantly radiating invisible energy waves. And this is the Mind Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones. With the Mind Stone in hand, the Space Stone is within reach. I have to thank the Mad Titan for this unexpected gift. At this moment, Rogel Dorn, squinting his eyes, stared at the half of the Mind Stone scepter in his palm and thought silently. Come on, Thor, let's end this alien invasion. The next second, Rogel Dorn took a deep breath and stuffed the broken scepter along with the Mind Stone into the storage space below the power pack. Then, he turned his head and said in a deep voice to Thor, the god of thunder, who remained silent. Thor, with a blank expression, didn't hesitate much. He continuously waved Mjolnir, which was flashing with lightning, in his palm. He flew towards the energy beam not far away like a rocket rising from the ground. Rogel Dorn slightly shook his head covered with gray-white short hair. He gripped the blood scythe tightly and drove the vibranium-powered armor to run forward quickly. Ka, ka, ka. A series of heavily tracked land raiders constantly crushed the incomplete corpses of the Chitauri infantry. The Contemptor dreadnought array and the vehicle crew inside controlled the twin-linked heavy bolters on both sides of the vehicle body. They occasionally rotated the lascannons on the top of the vehicle, bombarding any alien creatures that appeared within the firing range. Immediately following, squads of Astartes, divided into combat teams, drove heavy Terminator armor. They slowly filled in the few gaps between the heavy vehicles, using the storm bolters in their palms to frantically compress the living space of all Chitauri infantry. And just above the entire encirclement, along with the sharp whistling sound emitted by a large number of propulsion devices. Suits of mechanical armor with incredibly agile flying movements, under Tony's personal leadership, gradually converged with Thor, who was covered in lightning from head to toe. Those with flight capabilities began to cooperate with the newly reloaded Thunderhawk gunship squadrons to completely shoot down the Chitauri flying behemoths that were wandering and flying. Huge fleshy remains constantly crashed heavily towards the ground. Soon after, with the surprising appearance of Primarch Rogel Dorn, whether it was the Imperial Guard regiments on the outer perimeter of the encirclement or the Astartes who were slowly advancing, they all entered a state of frenzy that came completely from the heart. When those psychers from the Inquisition looked at the Astartes with puzzled eyes, abandoning their current combat methods. Instead, they chose to pick up the chainswords behind their power packs. After quickly following Rogel Dorn's charging pace forward, a unique, even extremely cruel, bloody slaughter was presented in front of everyone. In an instant, countless Chitauri limbs and fragments of flesh and blood flew everywhere, and the ground, covered with numerous blast craters, gradually became a river of blood. Just half an hour later, apart from some streets in the city where there were still many scattered Chitauri infantry. In this area directly below the large portal, whether it was the sky or the ground, no living alien could be found anymore. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Rogel Dorn, whose vibranium-powered armor was covered in blood, left the protection range of a Terminator combat squad. He instantly saw it a few meters away. The Tesseract, slowly suspended above an Asgardian magical rune array, constantly transmitting energy to the large portal. However, when Rogel Dorn activated the vibranium-powered armor, intending to step forward to destroy the magical rune array and forcibly stop the large portal. Vaguely remembering something, he quickly stopped his pace, and then immediately asked Iron Man David through the communication channel. David, is there any sign of the local official forces and S.H.I.E.L.D. launching nuclear weapons? My lord, you don't need to worry. I have been monitoring any movements of the official forces, and Mr. Rogers, as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., is also on the battlefield. He wouldn't choose such a reckless suicidal behavior. In fact, apart from the congressional side holding a secret emergency meeting, the air bases around New York are ready for battle, but for some reason, the action plan has been completely cancelled by the White House. Of course, according to the fragments currently circulating from the congressional side, I believe the entire Terra-Stellar Legion may attract worldwide attention after the war, and a series of lengthy squabbling meetings are also inevitable. The mechanical voice from Iron Man David slowly transmitted to Rogel Dorn's ears. Rogel Dorn, with a faint sneer unconsciously appearing at the corner of his mouth, took a deep breath and said indifferently. The situation is pressing. Many times, the degree of development of things is not something those aristocratic lords can control. David, remember to send trained agents to continue infiltrating. I want to firmly control all their actions. Yes, my lord. As soon as the voice fell, Rogel Dorn, quickly raising the blood scythe in his palm, destroyed the magical rune array under his feet without any hesitation. And as each rune shattered and dissipated, the energy beam maintaining the large portal quickly shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, the large portal, which had penetrated deep into the void, immediately contracted and collapsed inward, completely isolating the Chitauri fleet, which did not have time to carry out subsequent reinforcements, in the depths of the cold universe. Clang! At this moment, the Tesseract, emitting residual energy heat and wisps of white smoke, crashed to the ground, making an extremely crisp collision sound. With a calm expression, Rogel Dorn immediately activated the vibranium-powered armor and stepped forward, firmly grasping the Tesseract in his palm. The Space Stone is successfully obtained. 4 more to go. Why do I feel like I am the supervillain who is collecting the Infinity Stones? At this moment, Rogel Dorn, slightly raising his eyebrows, unconsciously turned his head. He looked at the Astartes holding chainswords and wearing Terminator armor around him. And also looked at Thor and Tony who had just landed. Rogel Dorn took a deep breath and muttered to himself. Perhaps, for the alien life of the native world, what I have done is no better than a villain. Quote, but for humanity, my conscience is clear. As the large portal covering the sky above the city center completely disappeared. The first half of this sudden Chitauri invasion temporarily ended, and for the large number of mortals who had just experienced life and death, and felt pain and helplessness. The Imperial Guard regiments from Latveria and the metal giants wearing power armor gradually became their temporary spiritual support. And the well-trained mortal warriors and the Lamenters, who cherished mortals very much, also shouldered the great task of comforting and even gathering people's hearts. This was even more useful than Rogers, who had accidentally revealed his identity as Captain America. Soon after, since the administrative departments of the local official forces had not appeared for a long time, and only a large number of S.H.I.E.L.D. special agent teams had arrived at the outer perimeter of the city battlefield. So, Iron Man David, according to the usual practice, issued a notice to the local official forces and S.H.I.E.L.D. respectively. Immediately let the logistics units of the Imperial Heavy Industries quickly enter the scene, carrying out the cleanup operation of collecting alien technology and sorting out the wreckage. At the same time, after a brief discussion between Rogel Dorn and others, Tony, who was temporarily promoted to Inquisitorial Grand Master, officially announced the existence of the Avengers Inquisition branch to the world through the internet. In this way, it can be regarded as slightly concealing the deployment behavior of the Inquisition and even the Terra-Stellar Legion, so as not to completely arouse the jealousy and fear of the official forces around the world. Although Rogel Dorn is not afraid of the challenges of any country or force now. But he still hopes that Iron Man David can use various means to subtly, or even bloodlessly, complete this Terra unification war, and try not to start a civil war on Earth. Even if Rogel Dorn also knows that this is actually a very extravagant idea, he still wants to try hard. After all, when the unification war progresses to the middle and late stages, a large number of native humans who are unwilling to become a part of the Empire will inevitably only have the road of rising up to resist to choose. And by that time, in order to maintain the stability of Terra, Primarch Rogel Dorn will have to raise the terrifying butcher knife called Astartes. As time continues to pass, the major news of the alien invasion of New York in the Superhero League, the Avengers Tribunal, successfully annihilating the invaders is rapidly spreading through the internet. And it's frantically fermenting into a terrifying situation that could ignite global public opinion. Because Iron Man David, following Luo Shah's orders this time, didn't implement necessary internet controls. This allowed countless ordinary civilians to successfully film a large amount of battlefield environments and intense battle scenes, even uploading them to various online platforms. Even though the American official forces tried to reduce the negative impact of the alien invasion with minor tactics such as deleting videos and blocking accounts. However, with the help of Iron Man David and Jarvis, they quickly made the opposing network forces give up their efforts, allowing all information to spread freely. At the same time, a video with the clearest quality and the most explosive content, randomly named Astartes Brutally Slaying Aliens, by the uploader, quickly became a top trending sensation worldwide, and was eagerly reported by countless mainstream media outlets. This was naturally a series of arrangements made by Iron Man David in order to respond to subsequent accountability from the major official forces of the native humans, and to allow the Tribunal and the Terra Astartes legions to successfully occupy the moral high ground. Although Iron Man David doesn't think the native humans can stir up any more trouble. But now that cosmic enemies are present, reducing some internal disputes for the Primarch is also a good thing. Post-war New York, the Sanctum Sanctorum. Inside a brightly lit, spacious hall, a dazzling array of food and drinks was laid out on a large wooden table. At this moment, Tony, who had lifted his mask and was talking to Rogers, 4, who was holding a large amount of alcohol and drinking wildly, and Luo Shah, who was swallowing slowly and deliberately, as well as 20-odd Tribunal superhumans who had fortunately survived, were diligently eating, replenishing the energy and stamina they had just consumed. After everyone had wolfed down their food and were almost finished, Luo Shah, wiping his lips, slowly raised a vibranium palm and gently snapped his fingers with a crisp sound. Snap. Instantly, everyone's attention quickly shifted to Luo Shah's bronze face. First of all, I want to congratulate everyone for walking off the battlefield alive. Your courageous fighting has allowed more mortals to return home and reunite with their families. At the same time, we must also offer our deepest condolences to some of the comrades who unfortunately sacrificed themselves. They dedicated their most precious lives to the future of humanity. May the Emperor protect their souls. Since the Tribunal has just established a branch department, the Avengers Tribunal, your battle merits will be calculated uniformly later. Whether it's money, resources, or other things, you will be given a satisfactory answer. Thank you for your hard work for the Tribunal. Now, except for Tony, 4, and Rogers, everyone else can temporarily leave the hall. The mages of the Sanctum Sanctorum will send you back to the Tribunal base where you came from. Luo Shah said slowly to everyone in front of him with a calm expression. And after those Tribunal superhumans, with tired or smiling faces, got up and left. He then turned his gaze to Tony and the others. Gentlemen, if there are no unexpected circumstances, the Chitauri fleet is on its way to Earth through hyperspace. That is to say, this battle of ours has only just begun. If we want to give the alien races in the universe an unforgettable lesson, we must launch a counterattack war sufficient to prove humanity. But more importantly, my student Jessica, and Doom's student Wanda, have unexpectedly disappeared, and no bodies have been found in any corner of the battlefield. So, if I'm not mistaken, Loki, that damned guy, left a backhand. He most likely captured them into the Chitauri fleet. As soon as the words fell, Luo Shah, taking a deep breath, became even more grim. If Loki hadn't been reduced to ashes after his death, he probably would have dug out the other party's corpse for a flogging. Frankly speaking, I already have a massive planetary defense plan in my mind. In order to protect the future safety of Earth, I want to personally put an indestructible suit of armor on Earth. At this moment, Tony, slamming a fist heavily on the table, quickly scanned everyone. He continued solemnly, "Of course, the most important issue right now is if we want to keep the aliens out, or even rescue the hostages, we must place the battlefield on the enemy's territory. Luo Sha, how are your mage forces? I see that the teleportation magic they control is very convenient. Can it support us in carrying out this raid?" Tony's words made Luo Sha shake his head slightly. He raised his eyes and glanced at the brightly lit hall environment, then said in a deep voice, "The mages, teleportation portals must clearly know the geographical location or have personally been there to be successfully opened. However, the Chitauri fleet is sailing and moving in the universe, and the combat environment inside the ships is almost completely unknown. The success rate of using this method for boarding tactics cannot be said to be non-existent, but it is very low, very low. Everyone, although I'm not a member of your tribunal, I also have an idea." At this moment, Rogers, who had been pondering for a moment, suddenly said to everyone around him, "The shield containment warehouse still has several small spaceships from unknown alien races, and they are structurally complete. Can we use these alien spaceships to carry combat personnel for infiltration and raids?" However, Rogers' words also made Luo Sha shake his head again. He took a deep breath and said, "Rogers, there's no problem with your idea, but you also said that those are all small spaceships. Even if we can figure out how to control them, they can't carry many people. And the Chitauri have a fleet. In addition, what I'm most concerned about is one thing, that is, the safety of the hostages. However, I currently have two backup plans that I can share with everyone for reference. The first plan is that the Space Stone, one of the Infinity Stones, has fallen into our hands, and I also have an Infinity Gauntlet that can control the Infinity Stones. Although I can't be sure whether my current physique and will can successfully control the Space Stone, it's still a worthwhile method to try. The second plan is a bit more complicated, that is, my base actually has a Cobra-class destroyer that is about 1.5 kilometers long. This is a real space warship. I believe that just relying on the firepower array on it can fight the Chitauri fleet. Not to mention that I will also lead the Astartes in boarding tactics. But the current problem is that even if a large number of crew members responsible for controlling the ship can be replaced by automatic servo robots, the scientific principles of the engine device of this type of space warship are completely different from the technology on Earth. Without a long period of research and experimentation, I'm afraid that after a rash start, our combat team will suffer irreparable huge losses. Believe me, you definitely don't want to be completely lost in the depths of the universe, right? Lord Roxia. Just then, with the heavy sound of footsteps coming from the power armor, Doom, whose complexion and injuries were much better than before, slowly appeared at the entrance of the brightly lit hall. "I heard from Mr. David that my disappointing student, Wanda, has become a hostage of the aliens. If she causes any losses to the rescue team later, I am willing to bear the necessary responsibility for her. If our action plan is still lacking scientific research talents, I have another important candidate who is very worthy of recommendation. To some extent, his research ability is even stronger than mine." Doom's words had just fallen. Roxia, who turned his gaze, stared at the approaching opponent and said, "Doom, how are your injuries? Not only your student Wanda, but even my student Jessica was tricked by Loki, but I always believed that their combat abilities can allow them to face all difficult challenges. Also, the person you mentioned wouldn't be." At this moment, Doom drove the power armor and arrived near the crowd. He rested his only remaining arm on the table and took over Roxia's unfinished words. "That's right, Reed Richards, a good friend from my university days. If we can also find him, plus me and Tony, the engine system of the Cobra-class destroyer should be understood clearly in a short time. Even if there are other problems, at least there will be no problem facing the Chitauri fleet. As for my injuries, Mr. Strange used magic to transfer most of them. Although my arm can't grow back temporarily, and I can't immediately join the battle, there is no problem with scientific research projects at all." Roxia did not speak immediately after hearing Doom's words. He squinted his eyes and thought for a moment, then slowly drove the vibranium power armor and stood up. "All right, then let's do as you said, immediately find Reed Richards. The others follow me first, to Gemini Island base." Not long after, a sparking portal appeared on the landing platform of Gemini Island base. Tony and Thor, as well as Rogers, under Roxia's personal leadership, slowly stepped out of the portal. Roxia immediately raised his hand and pointed to Rogers beside him to Redditus, who was flying towards him, and said indifferently, "Find a set of power armor that fits Rogers, and also put the 6-armed Terminator on Thor. Our combat mission is not over yet." Afterwards, Roxia, who received Redditus's reply, did not pay attention to Tony's complaints and mutterings in his ears. He turned around and greeted everyone. He quickly drove the vibranium power armor and walked towards the circular square deep in the base. After all, what everyone will face next is a space boarding battle. And speaking of boarding, I'm afraid no Astartes are more familiar with it than the Flesh Eaters. Most importantly, in addition to carrying out revenge and rescuing hostages, Roxia also had other small thoughts. That is, if possible, try to completely preserve a Chitauri fleet's spaceship. Even if the technology they master may be the lowest level alien technology in the native universe. But the faster-than-light engine that can support ships to travel across galaxies is what Roxia is determined to obtain. Even if it is eventually discovered that it cannot be used in the Warhammer universe. Then the native world can also save a lot of scientific research time for this. Spending fewer resources to form a temporary Terra Guardian fleet for emergency response. Chi chi chi, along with the sound of the air being torn apart by the masterfully crafted scythe. Chitauri infantry, roaring angrily, were constantly chopped into pieces of flesh and blood by Jessica, who was wielding melee weapons vigorously. And behind her, Wanda, with her red hair extremely disheveled, was kneeling on the ground, using the scarlet energy jumping back and forth on her fingertips to control the ever-overheating plasma pistol, providing necessary fire suppression for Jessica's flanks. "Jessica, we have to move, another huge Chitauri ape is coming." At this moment, Wanda, with a flash of scarlet energy deep in her eyes, shouted in a deep voice to Jessica beside her without hesitation. Jessica suddenly swung the masterfully crafted scythe in her palm into rounds of crescent moons, temporarily forcing back the Chitauri infantry constantly pouring out of the dark passage. She immediately drove the sister armor and turned nimbly, reached out and lifted Wanda, whose legs and feet seemed to have problems, and then quickly rushed towards the depths of the ship's passage. Dong dong dong. When Jessica led Wanda into a more complex dark passage, she turned her head and listened to the movement behind her, then gently put down Wanda in her palm. At this moment, Jessica, with a blank expression, propped her masterfully crafted scythe with one hand and let out a long breath. They can't catch up for the time being. These aliens have no independent self-awareness at all. I'm afraid it's a hive civilization similar to the Zerg. If we can find their mother, we may be able to achieve unexpected combat results. At this moment, Jessica, whose thoughts were turning quickly, suddenly said in a low voice to Wanda beside her. Wanda, who was paralyzed on the ground, subconsciously clenched the plasma pistol in her palm. She pursed her bloodless lips and muttered to herself, "Jessica, if I still hinder your battle later, remember to leave me behind. You have already done everything you can. Wanda, don't say such silly things. Without your help, how can I fight with these aliens?" However, Jessica, who widened her eyes slightly, looked down at Wanda's red hair and said in a solemn tone, "Moreover, my teacher taught me everything, but he didn't teach me to abandon my comrades. Don't worry, whether it's your teacher Doom or my teacher, they won't leave us alone. After all, even from a completely utilitarian point of view, if these aliens invading Earth are not completely eliminated, do you think our people can go to sleep peacefully?" Jessica's words had just fallen. Wanda, who seemed to be touched by the other party's words, immediately nodded vigorously. Even the originally dim eyes gradually brightened up. "That's right, we must persevere and continue to fight the aliens. I still want to see my brother Pietro. It is said that he is now a beloved religious leader." "Huh, Jessica, the Chitauri ape is still chasing after us." At this moment, Wanda's head turned suddenly. She did not hesitate to pull the trigger of the plasma pistol towards the depths of the ship's passage. At the same time, Jessica, who took a deep breath, quickly clenched the masterfully crafted scythe in her palm. She drove the sister armor forward with all her might, gradually accelerating. Suddenly, she let out an angry roar that resounded around. For humanity, buzzing, buzzing, along with the buzzing and trembling in the air, and the cold frost gradually spreading across the metal floor around. Ukar, the grim-faced Karkradon's astral librarian, was carefully manipulating the release of psychic energy. Soon after, right in front of the Emperor's statue. A spatial rift gradually tearing open clearly appeared in front of Rorschach. Just a few seconds later, a burly figure wearing ancient Terminator armor, very large in size, slowly stepped his magnetic boots onto the metal floor of the circular plaza. And when the other party skillfully stepped away from the spatial rift, one by one, fully armed Carcharodons Astartes also continuously emerged on the circular plaza. The next moment, Chapter Master Tyberos of the Carcharodons, still wearing a pair of lightning claws on his arms, drove his Terminator armor to Rock's presence. He first bowed slightly in salute, and then said in a low voice, "Primarch, the Carcharodons come from the void, answering your call. Who are you planning to destroy this time?" Hearing Tyberos's words, Rorschach nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, "Our mission target is a native alien fleet. But we currently only have one Cobra-class destroyer, several Inquisition combat personnel with decent combat capabilities, and a Lamenter's Terminator company, plus you Carcharodons." Just then, as Rorschach was speaking, he suddenly saw many Astartes veterans wearing ancient Terminator armor appearing in his field of vision. He was slightly stunned, raised his head, and stared at the helmet lenses of the Carcharodons chapter master and asked, "Tyberos, did you bring the entire Terminator First Company of the Carcharodons chapter? The alien fleet is troublesome, but it shouldn't be necessary. Primarch, your order is the order of the Void Father, and guarding your safety is also the necessary duty of us Carcharodons. If our librarian team couldn't bear more teleportation load, I could even bring the entire Carcharodons chapter to you." Tyberos, whose massive size was like a metal hill, lowered his head slightly. He said to Rorschach in front of him without any hesitation, "Besides, there haven't been many battles in the Ghoul Stars recently. Instead of letting the Void Brothers waste resources in the fleet, it's better to let them fight for you." "Oh, I thought you wanted to take the opportunity to replace the Terminator armor for the veterans of the First Company. It seems I misunderstood you," Rorschach, with a slight twitch of his brow, said without showing any emotion. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Chapter Master Tyberos clearly fell silent. He shook his metal helmet again and nodded to Rorschach in front of him. "There's nothing wrong with that either. The Carcharodons chapter thanks the Primarch for the generous gift. Then, in the upcoming battle, we will definitely solve any trouble for you. Alright, you continue to reorganize the chapter's troops. You are also familiar with everything in the base. I won't bother you. For things like resource mobilization, just go to the shipboard machine Spirit Cortana." At this moment, Rorschach, with a somewhat helpless expression on his bronze face, raised his hand and patted Tyberos's ceramite arm. He immediately turned and walked towards the passage of the circular plaza. Now, the entire Gemini Island base quickly entered a state of war preparation. A large number of ammunition supplies and weapons equipment were transported out of the forging factory's warehouse by teams of automated servitors. And when Iron Man David also led the Lamenter's Terminator company back to the base one after another. The Carcharodons and Lamenters immediately united and began coordination training for boarding tactics. Although the Chitauri fleet is far less terrifying than the Tyranid swarm. But in the ever-changing universe battlefield, no one knows what will happen. Perhaps it's just bad luck. A fully staffed combat squad will be instantly reimbursed, becoming a pile of cold void wreckage. At the same time, Doom, almost without stopping, also successfully brought Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, to Rorschach. And as Rorschach stared at this middle-aged man with gray hair on both sides of his head, and quickly thought about how to speak, Reed, with a gentle smile on his face, said solemnly, "Mr. Rorschach, you don't have to be polite. Although I know the style of your Terra Astartes Legion, I can still objectively view everything. Moreover, I even have to thank you for this alien invasion. If you hadn't sent those giant warriors called Astartes, my wife Susan and her interns would probably have become victims in this invasion war. Even if we people accidentally gain superpowers, single-handed superheroes are always difficult to fight against large-scale troop formations. This is also why I have always believed in teamwork. Doom has told me about the specific situation. Since time is tight, why don't we get straight to the point?" At this moment, facing Reed's heartfelt words and very pragmatic and friendly attitude, Rorschach, slightly surprised, naturally couldn't ask for more. He immediately ordered an automated servitor next to him to convey the order, ordering the mages staying at the Gemini Island base to open a portal directly to the interior of the Antarctic base. Before long, the science team, including Tony, successfully arrived in front of the Cobra-class destroyer parked on the super-large metal platform. And just as everyone couldn't help but gasp at such a realistic and magnificent universe warship, Reed, who was the first to withdraw his gaze, walked to Rock's side. He quickly said with a slightly excited expression, "Mr. Roche, if I'm not mistaken, this universe warship is probably also made by human technology, right? The aesthetic concepts of aliens are still vastly different from those of the human race. Moreover, this universe warship also has a faster-than-light engine that can perform interstellar navigation, right? Do you know what this means for humans on Earth? That means obtaining any resources in the universe is no longer a problem. You can even carry out large-scale interstellar colonization. Let the human race officially step into the interstellar era. Moreover, this is not an unreplicable superpower, but a technological product that can be mass-produced. Your Terra Astartes Legion's research capabilities have indeed impressed me. However, regarding Mr. Fantastic Reed's series of praises, Roche took a deep breath and shook his head and said, Reed, nothing is that simple. The current human race simply does not have the ability to cope with universe-level wars. After all, there isn't even a unified government that can mobilize resources worldwide. This is also one of the reasons why I have to independently shoulder the responsibility of resisting aliens. In addition, the warship's faster-than-light engine is very special. You can even think of it as a special technological creation that requires a unique spatial environment to operate. Of course, the specific situation and data still need you researchers to check in person. To be honest, I personally only understand the general theory and don't have much to research in depth. At this moment, Reed, after listening to Rock's words, smiled without any surprise. He stared at Rock's bronze face and slowly said, Understandable, after all, not everyone can face boring mathematical calculations and formulas for a long time, and enjoy the joy of developing scientific laws. Moreover, judging from the occasional body language you show, you probably prefer things like going into battle and killing enemies. Well, since you have chosen to trust my research capabilities so much, plus my friend Doom and this famous Mr. Stark assisting from the side, I guarantee to you in the name of Mr. Fantastic that, in a short time, this long-dormant universe warship will definitely take you to meet the alien invaders, universe fleet. Inside the Antarctic spaceport, automated servo robots, like dense steel worker ants, swarmed around the massive metal hull of the Cobra-class destroyer, performing necessary maintenance tasks such as maintaining the heavy armor. Meanwhile, on the metal floor around the ship, 13 gauntlet assault boats from the Flesh Tearers chapter, as well as a batch of boarding torpedoes jointly manufactured by two tech priests who temporarily set aside their differences, were being transported one by one into the ship by automated servo robots. The Cobra-class destroyer's most lethal space torpedoes had already been loaded into the side-mounted launch bays. Even the lance defense turret located at the bow of the ship had been inspected and refurbished. Soon after, if Iron Man David hadn't temporarily stopped Redditus and its servo slaves who were patrolling, the latter even wanted to thicken the Cobra-class destroyer's metal ramming horn several times. It wasn't until Redditus fully understood that ship speed and boarding tactics were the essence, and torpedoes and other weapons were only auxiliary, that it had to abandon its audacious idea of arming the Cobra-class destroyer into a steel hedgehog. Even so, such a small warship that had never appeared on Earth was a terrifying and formidable opponent for the Chidori fleet. At this moment, inside the ship, Roche was constantly monitoring the research progress of Reed and the others. Within his field of vision, Doom was casting a spell with one hand, using invisible telekinesis to disassemble the outer structure of the massive warp drive, providing basic convenience for others. Meanwhile, Tony, clad in mechanical armor, was, with the assistance of Jarvis, repeatedly scanning the engine's vital components, intending to use virtual imaging to construct an understandable blueprint. Of course, the most outrageous was Mr. Fantastic, Reed. Now, his entire person was like a rubber toy twisted into a huge braid. Each slender finger, extending several meters, was constantly tapping on dozens of external electronic devices. On the screens, lines of numerical code, flowing like a waterfall, were continuously refreshing within his field of vision. 24 hours later, Doom and the others, who had temporarily stopped disassembling and sorting out the numerical code, began to hold a meeting. Joy appeared on their faces at times, and dejection at others. Their expressions changed almost every few seconds. Soon after, Roche, who had been closing his eyes to rest, received good news and bad news. The good news was that the spaceship's technological level was indeed very advanced. But it was not so advanced as to be incomprehensible. Therefore, Reed and the others, as top scientists of mankind, could perform most of its reverse engineering. Subsequently, they gradually discovered that the Cobra-class destroyer actually possessed two engine operation modes. The first was a sub-light speed navigation mode not exceeding 90% of the speed of light. The second was the second mode that could open a space wormhole leading to an unknown area for faster than light travel, which was the main function of the warp drive. However, the bad news also came from this. Even Reed, known as Mr. Fantastic, expressed with slight helplessness. He still needed a lot of time and data research to ensure the safety of the second mode. After all, no one could know where the warp drive would lead everyone once it was activated. However, just as Roche, who was listening attentively, couldn't help but frown and was planning to find another way. Reed and the others changed the subject and said that they had already mastered the secrets of the sub-light speed navigation mode. Even through Tony's profound research on mechanical construction and energy, coupled with the Antarctic vibranium that Doom accidentally mentioned, they could forcibly increase the Cobra-class destroyer's warp speed to 99.9%, which was a super-state infinitely close to the speed of light. In this way, even if this small ship was for safety's sake, it was still temporarily unable to conduct long-range interstellar travel in the Earth universe. But it was more than enough to face the Chitauri fleet in the solar system. After listening to everyone's words, Roche, taking a deep breath, approved their plan to modify the warp drive without any hesitation. As for the other problems, they could be completely left until after this counterattack war was over. After receiving a batch of Antarctic vibranium, Reed and the others immediately confidently devoted themselves to the warship engine modification task. Roche, driving the vibranium-powered armor, also found Redditus, who was commanding a large number of automated servo robots. His purpose was also very simple, which was to have the servo skull hand over the infinity gauntlet that it had been keeping. However, as soon as Rock's words came out, Redditus, floating in midair, subconsciously lowered its height slightly, began to look around with erratic eyes, and spoke evasively. Roche, narrowing his eyes, raised his eyebrows and immediately continued to question the other party. Only then did he learn the truth from Redditus. That was that the Infinity Gauntlet had unexpectedly been disassembled into 8 pieces by Redditus. It wasn't until the disassembly was completed that the servo skull discovered that in order to ensure perfect control of the Infinity Stones, the Infinity Gauntlet, even the strength of the metal and the internal structure were almost integrally formed. Not to mention that the disassembly work also destroyed countless runes and energy transmission pipelines inside. At this moment, seeing the Primarch's face visibly turning worse at a speed visible to the naked eye, Redditus, trying to make amends, quickly stated that it had found various ways to repair the Infinity Gauntlet. Either give it a lot of time to research and replicate a new Infinity Gauntlet, or take the disassembled Infinity Gauntlet wreckage to Nidavellir, one of the 9 realms, and have the dwarves recast the Infinity Gauntlet once. Unfortunately, for Roche, each of these choices required a lot of time, but what they lacked most now was time. However, Roche, frowning tightly, did not deliberately make things difficult for Redditus. He didn't even implement punishments such as demotion. After all, it was Roche himself who hadn't paid too much attention to the existence of the Infinity Gauntlet before, and had only treated it as a randomly placed collectible. However, in this way, Rock's idea of trying to use the Space Stone to carry out large-scale Astartes teleportation tactics in this counterattack war had become a distant and unattainable hope. Although he could also learn from Loki's method, and let the sorcerers of Kamar Taj try to control the Space Stone with magic. But the Ancient One, who had not shown up for a long time, would most likely come forward to stop his risky approach. After all, the other party had been equally careful and cautious in dealing with the Time Stone for thousands of years. Anyway, the Infinity Stones of the Earth universe cannot be used in the Warhammer universe, so I don't need to dwell on this matter too much. Since the shortcut to save effort has been temporarily blocked, then let's still use our best old method. Let the alien xenomorphs of the Earth universe completely see the terror of the Astartes. At this moment, Roche, expressionless, drove the vibranium-powered armor, turned his head and left. And completely left the frightened Redditus behind. Accompanied by the Antarctic airport base above, the layers of huge, heavy metal decks slowly contracted and expanded outwards. The Cobra-class destroyer from the human empire was also exposed to the bright light of the native world for the first time. Along with the small ice particles stimulated by the large amount of cold air pouring into the internal space, and the white snowflakes floating in the wind. The huge chapter master Tyberos personally led the Flesh Tearers Terminator squad. And the Lamenter's Terminator Company, with Primarch Lehman Russ as the core, also slowly entered the interior of the warship from the hatch entrance. Before long, Thor, wearing the 6-armed Iron Rider Terminator armor, as well as Rogers, driving a speed-type power armor, and Tony, who deliberately replaced the most powerful, Iron Centurion, heavy mechanical armor to date, also quickly arrived inside the bridge located on the upper level of the warship. Apart from that, there were no other living people in the entire destroyer. Almost every basic position used to maintain the operation of the ship was personally controlled by Iron Man David, who temporarily acted as the captain, directly and effectively through automatic servo robots. In this way, the combat capability of this Cobra-class destroyer can be said to have increased exponentially. Boom boom boom. After Iron Man David, who had transformed into the ship's machine spirit, quickly checked the airtightness of the entire ship, accompanied by bursts of roaring tremors that suddenly spread to the entire airport base. The Cobra-class destroyer, with a hull length of 1.5 kilometers, gradually activated the huge warp drive that occupied 1/3 of the ship's space. Subsequently, the entire metal hull immediately rose slowly towards the sky above, and even into Earth's orbit. After the ship reached its predetermined orbit, the internal large-scale shipborne augury array and space radar instantly presented all data information of the entire Earth and even most of the solar system on the virtual image inside the bridge. At this moment, everyone standing firmly on the bridge deck was silent. They stared solemnly at the azure planet outside the bridge porthole, trying to feel the endless joy brought by mankind's first step into the deep space. Of course, only Rogers and Tony, who had never left Earth, felt this most deeply. After all, even Thor had long been accustomed to it, let alone Lehman Russ and the Astartes from the ship-based chapter. Not long after, Iron Man David, who was collecting and processing various data information, temporarily docked the Cobra-class destroyer in Earth's orbit. Lehman Russ and others, who quickly entered combat state, immediately discovered the true traces of the alien enemy through the data images constantly sent back by the research large-scale shipborne augury array. At this moment, a space fleet composed of a huge Chitauri mothership, plus 5 alien warships with completely different shapes and appearances, which did not seem to be from the same race at all, had arrived at the edge of the solar system. Currently, this alien fleet is rapidly approaching Earth at faster than light speed. Everyone present looked at each other. Lehman Russ, who had long been elected as the commander and master of the fleet, did not hesitate too much. He immediately ordered Iron Man David to activate the Cobra-class destroyer's native modified warp drive, preparing to meet the enemy's fleet in the depths of the solar system. The next moment, under the silent gaze of the deep space satellites surrounding Earth's orbit, and the subtle detection fluctuations from the direction of the moon, the huge metal hull slowly left its orbit, and the Cobra-class destroyer, which began to accelerate continuously, successfully entered a super-sublight speed navigation state that was infinitely close to the speed of light. And like an arrow leaving the string, it charged straight into the depths of the cold void. After about several days of navigation, the human space frigate and the Chitauri alien fleet launched the first large-scale space firefight in the native world near the Mars star field. And with the efforts of countless automatic servo robots controlled by Iron Man David, the colorful void shield slowly wrapped the entire Cobra-class destroyer completely. In an instant, beams of blue laser light and strangely shaped space torpedoes from the Chitauri fleet continuously crossed the cold void, repeatedly bombarding the human frigate's void shields. Unfortunately, even though what was in front of the aliens was only a small warship of the human empire. However, the void shield technology developed and iterated in the war-torn Warhammer universe still gave the aliens an incomprehensible shock. That is, this space warship with incredibly swift sailing speed is like an indestructible steel walnut. No matter how the alien fleet's firepower configuration is adjusted, the colorful void shield shows no signs of disappearing or shattering. And even those space torpedoes that can successfully pass through the void shield at a slow speed, successfully set off fierce explosions on the Cobra-class destroyer's heavy armor. Relying solely on the Empire's ship's always silly, big, and clumsy adamantium skeleton structure and incredibly thick metal armor, it simply cannot cause too much damage. In other words, as long as Iron Man David, who is the ship's machine spirit, does not deliberately act recklessly, then the space firepower of the alien fleet in front of him basically does not pose any devastating threat. Not long after, the Cobra-class destroyer, relying on its incredibly flexible movement angles and sailing speed, charged head-on towards the alien fleet and quickly mobilized the lance turret located above the bow. As terrifyingly powerful, but extremely short range, huge lances were launched one after another. A small alien warship that was trying to protect the Chitauri mothership became the main target of the lances. Boom rumble. At this moment, even though sound cannot be transmitted in the cold void, the people who had just planned to leave the bridge position still subconsciously imagined the sound of the explosion in the porthole screen. And the small alien warship that was unfortunately the first target of the Cobra-class destroyer's attack did not resist for long, and even the entire ship structure gradually exploded into scattered metal wreckage. Boom rumble. After the second medium-sized alien supply ship located on the assault route was once again blasted into metal wreckage by the lance turret personally controlled by Iron Man David. The Cobra-class destroyer, whose void shields and metal armor were constantly withstanding enemy attacks, actually forcibly passed through the center of the alien fleet and quickly arrived at the rear of the alien fleet. Immediately afterwards, accompanied by the huge metal hull of the Cobra-class destroyer slowly traversing over. From the rows of torpedo launchers located on the side of the ship, boarding torpedoes loaded with Astartes terminators, as well as many space torpedoes with misleading effects, were rapidly ejected. At the same time, squads of gauntlet landing craft, fully loaded with flesh tearers and lamenters terminators, also rapidly detached from the lower deck of the Cobra-class destroyer. These ancient space vehicles designed specifically for the Astartes, like steel fleas constantly besieging their prey, launched extremely fatal boarding tactics against the remaining 4 alien warships of various sizes. Boom rumble. Among them, the largest Chitauri mothership unexpectedly received the enthusiastic hospitality of 10 gauntlet landing craft. And with the intense roaring of terrifying melta beams penetrating the heavy armor, each gauntlet landing craft successfully entered the deepest part of the Chitauri mothership. Now, this undoubtedly only represents one thing, and that is that the Chitauri fleet is about to face a catastrophic disaster. Bang! The heavy hatch doors of the gauntlet assault boats slammed open. The next second, Space Marines from the Space Sharks and Lamenters chapters in Terminator armor slowly stepped into the dimly lit interior of the alien ship. Boom, boom, boom. Storm bolters, fully loaded with ammunition, rotated in the hands of the Astartes, finally and ruthlessly pulling their triggers. Countless bolt rounds either directly hit the Chitauri infantry within the scope of their vision, or penetrated the thick metal bulkheads, completely shattering some of the alien creatures attempting to ambush and lay in wait. Just then, accompanied by the terrifying roar of numerous bolt rounds, Chapter Master Tyberos, a massive figure, appeared behind these Terminator squads, followed by Rorschach wielding the blood scythe. They nodded to each other but didn't exchange many words. Instead, they began to lead a squad of Terminators each, according to their respective combat habits, and rapidly advanced into the complex and intricate passages of the ship, initiating a bloody massacre. Chi, chi, chi. With a purple light illuminating the entire passage, metal 10 rings, shimmering with purple light, instantly shot through the air. They pierced through dozens of Chitauri infantry wielding laser rifles within the ship's passages. However, the sacrifice of many individuals did not cause the Chitauri's central command to feel the slightest fear. Instead, they continued to dispatch more Chitauri infantry to launch continuous attacks against the Terminator squads entering the ship. At this moment, Rorschach carefully observed the looming alien creatures through his helmet's visor. He gently waved his vibranium hand. The Terminator squad behind him quickly activated their power armor and stepped forward, launching a continuous barrage of bolt rounds against the alien enemies. At the same time, a series of data began to rapidly refresh on Rorschach's helmet screen. The faint life signals from Jessica and Wanda became the most prominent guiding beacons. If Tyberos' mission was to kill the aliens and seize the Chitauri mothership, then Rorschach came here to retrieve his only students. Crack crack. Instantly, the blood scythe, tightly gripped in Rorschach's hand, was rapidly swung. A large opening, sufficient for a power-armored figure to pass through, was instantly cleaved into the nearby thick metal bulkhead. As countless metal fragments continuously fell and collided, a squad of Chitauri infantry in the adjacent passage, intending to provide combat support, seemed to pause slightly. However, Rorschach did not give them a chance to react. As the blood scythe rapidly danced, a large number of severed limbs and pieces of flesh gradually covered the entire dim passage. Soon after, Rorschach, after lightly shaking the blood scythe, once again cleaved a large opening in the thick bulkhead. Subsequently, he continued to advance towards Jessica and the others with firm steps. At this moment, similar bloody massacres were also taking place on other alien ships. With Mjolnir, shimmering with lightning, continuously piercing through a large number of metal bulkheads like a shell fired from a cannon. Inside this small alien ship, which was not large to begin with, countless alien corpses, charred by the terrifying lightning, were lying beneath Thor's magnetic boots. Not far away, Space Marines from the Space Sharks and Lamenter's chapters, wearing Terminator armor, did not even use storm bolters. They easily occupied most of the ship's compartments with power swords or chainswords in their hands. Inside another medium-sized alien ship in the cold void, a vibranium shield was bouncing back and forth between the metal bulkheads. After the incredibly hard edge of the shield shattered the skulls of dozens of aliens, it returned to Roger's ceramite arm through an incredible ricochet angle. The next second, the power armor, with its propulsion devices continuously activated behind the power pack, charged towards the approaching aliens like a bolt of lightning. And the Lamenter's Terminators, each carrying an autocannon in their hands, followed Roger's heavy footsteps, launching a charging volley into the metal passage. And inside the last small alien ship, Tony, wearing the Iron Centurion armor, controlled the massive heavy mechanical armor. He was like a metal behemoth in a berserk state. He was constantly engaging in a back-and-forth boxing match with the Chitauri berserkers surrounding him. And each time he successfully knocked down a Chitauri berserker, Tony, raising his thick arms, would let out a joyful roar like an ape. This made the Astartes Terminators who were clearing out the alien creatures around him couldn't help but shake their metal helmets. After all, compared to the Chitauri berserkers in front of him, Tony now seemed more like a passionate animal. Kacha, accompanied by the subtle sound of metal and bones gradually breaking, a Chitauri infantryman with a shattered head slowly slid from Rorschach's vibranium palm and fell heavily into the metal passage. Just behind him, metal 10 rings shimmering with purple light were moving back and forth in the dim air. And a large number of alien creatures with incomplete limbs, almost unrecognizable, had filled the entire metal passage. Now, the number of aliens inside the entire Chitauri mothership was rapidly decreasing. This undoubtedly plunged the Chitauri's central command into extreme panic caused by some kind of data corruption. The opponent began to constantly gather the few remaining Chitauri aliens, attempting to defend the mothership's bridge. Unfortunately, this situation was nothing more than swinging the lightning claws a few more times for Chapter Master Tiberos, who was in a killing frenzy. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Rorschach, after listening carefully, drove his vibranium power armor forward without any hesitation. If there were no unexpected circumstances, his students, Jessica and Wanda, were holed up for a long time in a dead end of a passage ahead. Whoosh! Just then, as Rorschach's magnetic boots stepped over the corner of the passage floor, a masterwork scythe covered in azure light slammed down towards the top of his helmet. However, Rorschach, seasoned in slaughter, reacted with unparalleled speed. He abruptly raised a vibranium palm, and used it to firmly grip the sharp blade of the masterwork scythe in his palm with a single move. The next second, a deep voice echoed through the dimly lit passage through the vibranium helmet. Jessica, wake up! At this moment, Jessica's eyes, whose mental will was almost in a state of madness, seemed to flicker slightly. A few seconds later, she widened her eyes slightly and raised her mentally haggard pale face. Then she murmured in a voice filled with relief and grievance, "Teacher, why are you only here now?" As soon as the voice fell, one of Rorschach's vibranium palms immediately released the masterwork scythe. After slowly reaching forward, he gently patted Jessica's head, which was covered in alien blood. "Come on, Jessica, I'll take you to kill all the aliens." Dong, 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 accompanied by the heavy footsteps of magnetic boots frantically stomping on the metal floor. In an instant, several Chitauri giant apes, with physiques nearly identical to Terminator armor, didn't have time to launch any counterattacks. They were torn into a shower of blood and flesh by Tiberius, who was launching a terrifying charge, using the lightning claws on his palms. At the same time, the Carcharodon Terminators, whose offensive style rivaled the Khorne Berserkers, and the Lamenter's Terminators, whose combat methods were more refined, repeatedly swung their melee weapons in their palms, efficiently and agilely killing any alien creature that appeared within their visor range. And on the surrounding metal floor, countless alien limbs and flesh had almost piled up into small mountains. Soon after, as the last Terminator squad that came to assemble stepped out of the dimly lit metal passage, the battle to continuously attack the Chitauri mothership's bridge was about to enter its final moment. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just at this moment, accompanied by a piercing buzzing vibration, one after another, metal 10 rings shimmering with purple light streaked across the air. Driven by his vibranium-powered armor, Rorschach also led Jessica, who had regained her spirits. And Wanda, whom she carried on her back, joined the final battle. As the Astartes Terminators gradually lined up in a row, constantly waving their melee weapons, slowly advancing forward. Half an hour later, the last remaining Chitauri aliens on the entire mothership finally became souls fallen under the sharp blades. Rumble. When no more living aliens could be seen within the visor range, Chapter Master Tiberius slowly drove his ancient Terminator armor forward. His massive figure stood at the entrance of the bridge, a pair of terrifying lightning claws wildly swinging. In the blink of an eye, as chunks of heavy metal wreckage continuously fell onto the metal floor, the bridge hatch in front of him was easily cut into countless metal fragments by his lightning claws. However, as the space inside the bridge was exposed within the visor range, Tiberius, who quickly observed the internal structure and environment, did not immediately enter. He slowly moved his massive body, turning his metal helmet to look at Rorschach standing behind him. And Rorschach didn't hesitate much. He raised a vibranium palm and waved it lightly, leading a squad of Terminators, slowly stepping into the important area belonging to the alien mothership. Looking around, inside the dimly lit bridge space, apart from the large screens that almost covered all the walls, there were no aliens present, only a cylindrical mechanical creation about 10 meters high sitting alone in the center of the bridge. This is the core of this alien mothership, a Chitauri overmind created using a mixture of flesh and machinery. Just at this moment, Rorschach observed the flesh matter occasionally revealed inside the cylindrical mechanical creation through his visor. He asked the people around him without turning his head. However, just as Tiberius and the others were about to make a reasonable explanation based on their past combat experience, a mechanical voice, definitely from the Chitauri overmind, quickly echoed throughout the interior of the entire bridge. "Ah, a group of foolish earth monkeys, do you know what kind of taboo things you have touched? Do you know what our arrival represents? How dare you resist the great master?" At this moment, before the other party could finish speaking, Rorschach, who was completely unmoved, quickly drew the heart of the forge from the waist of his power armor and pulled the trigger without hesitation. In an instant, scorching plasma spheres constantly spraying out of the muzzle quickly gathered together, instantly illuminating the entire dimly lit bridge space. In the next second, a large number of plasma spheres rapidly expanded into a huge wave of scorching plasma. Then it completely enveloped the entire cylindrical mechanical creation. "Ah, no!" accompanied by a short and blurry scream that reached everyone's ears. This Chitauri overmind, which was 10 meters tall, was immediately melted into a large pool of freely flowing molten metal. Rorschach, who slightly shook his vibranium helmet, slowly put away the heart of the forge. Driving his vibranium-powered armor, he turned and walked out of the bridge. At this moment, with the complete termination of the alien overmind, it also meant that Rorschach had perfectly put an end to the entire Chitauri invasion incident. But at the same time, it also meant the local humans or Rorschach and others had completely forged an irreconcilable conflict with that mad titan. Cobra-class destroyer, inside the bridge, near the slowly opening porthole deck, the people who had successfully returned from the other alien ships gradually gathered together. Soon after, data statistics from Iron Man David were displayed in front of everyone. In this revenge counterattack launched by humans against the alien fleet, apart from a dozen Astartes battle brothers who were unlucky enough to crash into ammunition depots or power compartments with boarding torpedoes and were accidentally seriously injured, there were no other people who suffered unacceptable casualties. Tony and others, who had just participated in this space boarding battle, gradually regained their rationality and thinking after experiencing the initial excitement and stimulation. At this moment, the thing that everyone was repeatedly discussing was how they should bring these successfully captured alien ships back to Earth. After all, even if most of the alien technology above could not be used or even learned, but many devices that could be reverse engineered could also take the technological development level of local humans to a higher level. Several hours later, after everyone had racked their brains and conducted several discussions, and finally fell into a state of silence, Roche, who was more decisive in his actions, made an important decision. That was to only bring the Chitauri mothership back to Earth for research and engineering. The remaining 3 alien ships could be temporarily docked in the nearby Martian orbit, to be left for future scientific research missions. After all, the Cobra-class destroyer they were currently on also had to be driven back, and there were simply not enough people to allocate. So, Iron Man David, who received the order, began to transfer the automatic servo robots that controlled the ship's fire control system to the Chitauri mothership one by one. And Tony also temporarily contributed his heavy mechanical armor as a beacon for Iron Man David to perform relay control. Soon after, the Cobra-class destroyer, which had successfully completed its first space battle, and the precious trophy, the Chitauri mothership, successfully embarked on the long journey back to Earth. In the frigid depths of the universe, amidst the endless stars, the colossal alien warship, Sanctuary 2, was slowly heading towards a habitable, fiery red planet. Inside the alien warship, within the almost empty bridge, a massive figure clad in dark golden, heavy armor was meditating on a floating throne. Thud, thud, thud. Just then, a series of unhurried footsteps echoed. A slender figure in ornate black robes appeared at the edge of the spacious bridge. Let me guess, the Iron Blood brothers and the Chitauri fleet have both failed. Even Odin's little whelp is dead. At that moment, before the newcomer could approach the floating throne, the massive figure with purple skin slowly emitted a deep voice, devoid of any emotional fluctuation. Upon hearing the words of the figure, Ebony Maw, his expression slightly changed, hastily bowed towards the massive figure, keeping his head lowered as he said, "Great Master, you truly are the sole wise one who controls the mysteries of the universe. The development of all events has never deviated from your expectations. Ebony Maw, I am no wise one. I am merely an old man who understands a little more of the cruel truth than the myriad beings in the universe." The deep voice echoed continuously within the dimly lit bridge. The next moment, the massive figure seemed to take a deep breath. Then, the figure slowly rose from the floating throne. Just like in the eyes of those sacrificed and purified cosmic races, I am mockingly called the Mad Titan, a war maniac, a world-destroying overlord, but what I yearn for most is to be in a vast, eternally peaceful universe, becoming a farmer who simply weeds and tills the land every day. My master, all your wishes will eventually be realized. But what should we do now? Should we dispatch all of the Black Order and the Vanguard army to Earth, directly annihilate the entire human race, and retrieve the lost and yet to be obtained Infinity Stones? Ebony Maw slowly raised his pale face and asked softly, his gaze fixed on the cosmic butcher before him, who claimed his dream was to become a farmer, and he subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of cold saliva. Retrieve? No, mere humans and Earth are not important. Even the gain or loss of the Infinity Stones is not important. They are merely convenient tools that save me effort. Without the help of tools, are we unable to accomplish anything? Ebony Maw, as my longest serving and most loyal servant, haven't you understood yet? Nothing else matters. Only by securing victory in this eternal war for our universe can we find the only path to salvation. The massive figure clad in dark golden armor suddenly turned its incredibly robust and burly body. A purple face, covered in wrinkles on the chin, was clearly revealed within Ebony Maw's line of sight. Ebony Maw, his eyes slightly widened, quickly lowered his pale face to show respect. My master, please, you must not speak anymore. We mortals cannot touch those great beings who transcend reason. Even occasionally hearing a few words will bring about inescapable and tragic misfortune. Heh, Ebony Maw, what are you afraid of? Destiny now stands on our side, or rather, I am destiny. At that moment, Thanos, the Mad Titan, slightly raised his head and suddenly spread his thick arms forcefully. Between the gaps in the dark golden armor, strands of flickering, multicolored energy continuously shimmered beneath the rough purple skin. Then, he coldly said to Ebony Maw, who was trembling all over, to resist the 5 invading deities from an unknown universe, the eternal war above the cosmic sky is in urgent need of soldiers. Now, Death has decreed that we no longer need to painstakingly maintain the balance on the tens of thousands of habitable planets we encounter next. Since these ignorant beings were born in this universe, they must pay the corresponding price for the survival of the universe. Ah, Lord Thanos, if our actions suddenly become so resolute, then countless alien races throughout the universe will choose the path of resistance, instead of sitting and waiting for their demise as before. At this moment, the Mad Titan's voice had not completely faded. Ebony Maw, who had begun to bleed from all 7 orifices due to a forbidden word he could not listen to, knelt painfully on the cold ground. He issued a difficult cry, almost like a wail, towards Thanos in front of him. Heh, resist. How do they plan to resist? When the gods who created them stand on my side, the fate of almost all beings has long been sealed. Also, why do you think I no longer care so much about the Infinity Stones? Because, Annihilation, one of the 5 great gods, has bestowed upon me the true location of a cosmic cube as a reward. At this moment, the appearance of another forbidden word finally caused Ebony Maw, kneeling on the ground, to suddenly spit out a mouthful of incredibly viscous black blood. He fell heavily to the ground. His slender body trembled and curled up, as if he had temporarily lost all consciousness. The Mad Titan, with his thick arms slowly behind his back, looked down at the incredibly fragile servant before him with cold eyes devoid of any emotional fluctuation. He seemed to let out a long sigh from his mouth. Pitiful servant, how can you become their chosen one if you cannot even know the names of the 5 gods? If you are not even a chosen one, how can you have the ability to resist the 5 evil beings who threaten the life and death of the entire universe? And if even the 5 great gods unfortunately fail in the future, then who in the universe can shoulder the difficult responsibility of protecting the entire universe? After thinking it over, only I, Thanos, am capable. After more than 10 days of smooth sailing, 2 space warships of different sizes successfully arrived near Earth. In order not to cause extreme panic among the global population and official forces. After another discussion, Luo Sha and others decided to temporarily dock the Chitauri mothership in lunar orbit. Soon after, the Cobra-class destroyer, personally piloted by Iron Man David, returned to Earth's near-Earth orbit. And gradually returned to directly above the Antarctic spaceport. Currently, this battle-hardened Cobra-class destroyer will serve as a space fortress belonging to the Terra Star Realm Legion. Temporarily undertake multiple tasks such as solar system defense and detecting enemy invasions. Until Tony's still conceptual planetary defense plan or more space warships are successfully manufactured. This Cobra-class destroyer will then retire honorably or be wrecked in deep space. Twin Islands Base. Having just returned, the group went through a celebratory round-table barbecue before everyone gradually returned to their own paths. Rogers, who had been gifted a speed-type power armor by Rorschach, had to return to lead the entire shield. He still needed to face the encirclement and interception of those old men in Congress, making a series of reports and declarations to officially join the war against the alien invasion as Captain America. As the Grand Master of the Inquisition, Tony also had to truly establish the Avengers Inquisition, which was currently just an empty shell. He needed to recruit more superhumans and expand the Avengers Inquisition's personnel. At the same time, he also needed to quickly come up with a planetary defense plan to defend against or counter the next alien invasion or crisis event. Currently, Tony's preliminary idea, as revealed to Rorschach and the others, was that he wanted to rely on the Space Stone's teleportation ability to build large-scale early warning fortresses or unmanned firepower turrets on the major planets within the solar system. Moreover, the ultimate version of the planetary defense plan was to completely hollow out and weaponize every terrestrial planet, directly building them into combat planets that could protect the entire solar system. Even the well-informed Rorschach couldn't help but give Tony's crazy idea a thumbs up. If Tony had gone with him to the Warhammer universe, it was estimated that the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Orc boys would have greatly praised this idea. Perhaps honorary titles such as Grand Magos or Big Mech would have been stuffed into Tony himself. However, Tony's crazy idea, for Rorschach now, actually had the possibility of realization. It would just take a lot of time and resources. Of course, the most important thing for humanity at the moment was to establish a large-scale Auspex array in near-Earth orbit, used to detect the entire solar system and even the cosmic starry sky at a greater distance. In order to promote this matter smoothly and catch up with the necessary project progress, Rorschach, after thinking for a while, decided that he couldn't do it alone. He ordered Iron Man David to contact Director Zheng Xian of the God Spear Bureau, and told the other party the whole incident and detailed information of the alien invasion. About 24 hours later, Zheng Xian, who had successfully obtained more authority from the higher-ups, solemnly received a tech priest temporarily dispatched from the Gemini Island base, along with the manufacturing blueprint of the detection array, at a secret location in Asia. In the next period of time, Asia will become the designated ally for manufacturing the detection array, and will fully share the intelligence information after the completion of the detection array with the Gemini Island base. As for the part of the Imperial technology deliberately leaked to the other party, in Rorschach's view, it was more like bait he threw out casually. If everything goes well, a region that has long used the technology of the human empire and whose style is far more enlightened and prosperous than the human empire, how can it not be regarded as a member of the human empire? A few days later, Thor, who had to return to the Midgard branch of the Asgardian Legion, reluctantly bid farewell to Rorschach. However, from Rorschach's point of view, Thor wasn't so reluctant to part with him, a brother who had fought side by side. It was purely because when the other party led a part of the Asgardian Legion to Midgard, he made an impulsive oath in front of the god King Odin. That is, except for a very small number of magical weapons that can return to Asgard for resupply, all other material consumption needs to be borne independently by Thor. According to Thor himself, who was drunk, he had almost exhausted his small treasury, and besides occasionally receiving pocket money subsidies from his mother Frigga, he had fallen to the point where he needed to stand on platforms for some commercial openings as a superhero to support hundreds of super gluttons. Of course, it wasn't that Rorschach and Tony and others were unwilling to help. On the contrary, it was because Thor himself was unwilling to speak to others because of dignity issues. After all, Thor, the future god king of Asgard and the thunder god of mythology, couldn't bear the material consumption of many subordinates. If this were said, it would probably become a classic joke spread throughout the 9 realms. After Thor took off and left Gemini Island, Rorschach, whose expression was a little bit between crying and laughing, asked Iron Man David to transfer a batch of supplies and money to Thor's side. It was also a small reward for Thor, who had made a great contribution to the war against the alien invasion. However, just as Rorschach carefully estimated the time and planned to lead the Karkradon's Astra chapter, who were temporarily staying at the Gemini Island base, back to the Warhammer universe, Reditus, who had been busy manufacturing brand new power armor for the Karkradon's Terminators, found Rorschach again. "Oh, you mean that the carefully prepared gift has been completed?" Rorschach raised his eyebrows, driving the vibranium power armor towards the foundry inside Sub-Island. He turned his head and asked Reditus, who was floating in midair. "Honorable Primarch, this is by far my most satisfactory work besides the miniature Knight Titan, and it can even be said to be a stepping stone for me to vaguely touch the level of master creations." At this moment, Reditus, whose eye sockets were flashing red, said excitedly. Although Rorschach, with a calm expression, didn't comment on this, he gradually raised a hint of curiosity. More than 10 minutes later, when Rorschach and Reditus successfully arrived inside the foundry hall of the foundry, the automatic servo robots with mechanical tentacles waving back and forth quickly started, suddenly lifting a white dust cloth located above a large display stand. In the next moment, the breastplate and abdominal armor surfaces were engraved with the Emperor's prayers, and the limbs were glowing with a light golden metallic luster. One heavy shoulder pad remained normal, while the other was shaped like an eagle's head, and the power backpack on the back was almost hidden. Even the scapula position extended outward, with a pair of feather-like golden leaves layered and intertwined into huge wings. Such a set of brand new power armor, far beyond imagination, was very clearly presented in front of Rorschach. Moreover, the most eye-catching thing was not just these. Just in front of the rounded metal helmet, a ferocious human skull-shaped face replaced the more common breathing apparatus. Plus that pair of dark red helmet lenses. At a glance, it was as if a fresh skull, eager to devour people, had just been stripped of its flesh and skin, and then casually placed on top of the power armor. "Aha, Honorable Primarch, aren't you stunned by my perfect work? This is the precious gift I plan to give you." At this moment, Reditus, bouncing up and down in midair, shouted loudly to Rorschach beside him, even his mechanical voice was full of heavy, overlapping excited tremolos. At this moment, Roche, his eyes narrowed, subconsciously turned his head. He stared at Reditus not far away and asked in a deep voice. "Then tell me in detail about the functions of this power armor." "No problem, esteemed Primarch, then let me start with the manufacturing materials." Reditus, with red light flashing in his eye sockets, immediately drove the anti-gravity engine to circle around Rock's tall body. He said proudly, "After melting and mixing the original vibranium and Antarctic vibranium in a certain proportion, this light golden new vibranium material was born, retaining the indestructible strength of the metal, and also additionally stimulating a new function, that is, when the entire power armor receives a large amount of attacks and damage, it will gradually accumulate powerful kinetic energy and then burst out all at once. In fact, this was originally one of the characteristics of the original vibranium, but when I made this power armor for you last time, I seem to have messed up the formula ratio and failed to test it successfully. Of course, there are also problems, that is, it is impossible to spray any paint on the surface of the armor, and only this light golden color can be retained. Next is the internal structure. The power amplification brought by the electronic muscle bundles made of Antarctic vibranium is much higher than before. If the power armor you are using now can amplify by 1/3, then the new power armor can increase the power by about half. In addition, these metal wings made by my own hands are definitely not simple decorations. After adding a large number of electronic muscle bundles and servo devices as supporting structures inside, they can be completely transformed into mechanical arms that move at will, and more importantly, when these metal wings curl inward, the propulsion device that borrows from the arc reactor will be temporarily assembled, that is to say, you have successfully obtained the ability to fly short distances. If the exquisite structure of the metal wings is the result of my painstaking design, then the skull helmet is my personal little fun. The specific inspiration comes from the priest brothers of the Astartes, who always like to wear this skull-shaped mask. Moreover, for your convenience, the skull helmet does not even need to be taken off, because living metal from the Necrons is added inside, and the overall structure of the skull helmet is also modular vibranium. With just a thought, the built-in nerve connection system will completely retract the deformed skull helmet into the interior of the armor. However, the only problem is that the defensive ability of the skull helmet is about 1/3 lower than that of the metal helmet cast in one piece using vibranium, but it is also 100 times stronger than the ceramite helmet, so you need to pay more attention to this weakness that is not a weakness. At this moment, the words from Redditus continuously entered Rock's ears. And after the other party finished speaking, Roche, who subconsciously took a deep breath, immediately nodded and said, "Come on, let me try it on. If it's really as good as you said, Redditus, you have done a great job again. Hehe, it is my honor to serve the Primarch." Hearing Rock's praise, the red light in Redditus's eye sockets flickered even faster. He hurriedly greeted the surrounding automatic servo robots to dismantle the vibranium power armor on Rock's body. By the way, does this new power armor have a name yet? At this moment, Roche, who slowly stretched out his arms, suddenly asked Redditus. And Redditus seemed to hesitate slightly, but still said, "In fact, I originally wanted to name it Armor of Truth, but later I temporarily changed my mind. If you don't mind, Primarch, I plan to call it Starlight Glory, which also symbolizes that you, Primarch, are like a spark of starlight, bringing the Emperor's glory to the current human empire." Well, Starlight Glory, a good meaning, let's decide on that. Buzzing. A warp gate suddenly tore open in the air, filled with a cold smell. The librarians from the Carcharodon's chapter were releasing psychic energy with all their might, while maintaining 200% vigilance. The next second, Chapter Master Tiberos, with his massive body, led a group of First Company veterans who were not only wearing brand new Terminator armor, but also carrying ancient Terminator armor in their hands, back to the interior of the chapter flagship, Nicor. Not long after, a heavy magnetic boot with a light golden metallic luster also stepped out of the warp gate. At this moment, Roche, wearing the Starlight Glory on his tall body, arrived in front of everyone, carrying the green light entwined blood scythe and the dark and heavy Dawnbringer warhammer respectively. Thump, with an extremely dull collision sound. The Dawnbringer warhammer was heavily placed on the metal floor, vaguely smashing out a shallow dent. Now, thanks to the power amplification brought by the Starlight Glory power armor, and Rock's own growing physical strength, it also allowed him to barely pick up Vulcan's Dawnbringer warhammer. But even so, the physical exertion can only support Roche to swing it 3 or 4 times. If he wants to swing it at will like the blood scythe, he still has a long staircase to climb. Thump thump thump, several Terminator veterans drove their power armor forward. Together, they reached out and lifted the extremely heavy Dawnbringer warhammer and moved it towards the ship's passage. Roche, wearing light golden power armor, exchanged a few simple words with Chief Librarian Kulanchi and others. He also turned and walked out of the ritual hall. Soon after, on the metal throne that once belonged to Tiberos, Roche, with a pair of huge light golden wings slightly spread out behind his spine, slowly sat on it. He first turned his head and looked around. Then, he reached out from the storage space behind his waist and took out a mind stone emitting a faint yellow light. Leave the space stone to Tony and the others for scientific research, and I will carry the mind stone with me. Without an infinity stone, I want to see what kind of storm that mad titan can stir up. Roche, his eyes narrowed, was playing with the mind stone, which was not very useful in the Warhammer universe. He quickly opened the simulator and took out a palm-sized throne coin from it. Currently, both the home world and the Ghoul stars have entered a rare period of peace. And Roche has finally been able to take the time to complete some things. He plans to continue simulating to obtain various technologies or enhancement surgeries. Emperor protects. Roche took a deep breath, his metal fingers twitching slightly. A throne coin immediately flipped and soared into the air. Ding. Open black lens bracket simulation starting. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket current identities. Space Wolves 13th Great Company Captain, Death World Fenris, Lord Cypher, Dark Angels Fortress Monastery, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Please select a landing identity. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. If refused, a random landing will occur. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Identity selection refused. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Simulation starting. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You are now in the Warhammer universe. A random time and location will be selected for landing. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Time, M41. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Location, Shrine World Damnation. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You have successfully landed in the night sky above the Shrine World. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Before you could fully open your eyes, you once again felt the terrifying sensation of a rapid descent. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You didn't have time to complain. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You unhesitatingly used the neural link to deploy the enormous metal wings on the back of your power armor, simultaneously spreading your arms and legs to maintain a gliding posture. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Just then, your vision, through the helmet's visor, clearly saw a fierce battle unfolding in real time on a collapsed street below. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Astartes forces wearing green livery, under the cover of some mortal soldiers, were engaging some strangely shaped alien races. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You subconsciously adjusted your gliding direction. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You were about to reach behind you to draw your ever-present melee weapon, but suddenly realized that other than this suit of Star Crusade pattern power armor, you had nothing else. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You couldn't help but let out a low curse from within the skull helmet that scattered in the wind. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, accompanied by the whistling of the wind constantly rushing towards you, and the booming of bolters approaching from afar. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your towering figure, with the repeated adjustments of the enormous metal wings, heavily landed in the center of the battlefield between the two sides. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Rumble. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Large amounts of dust and gravel constantly flew outwards. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your sudden arrival also temporarily shocked the Mordian Iron Guard wearing blue uniforms and wielding lasguns, even forgetting to pull the triggers of their weapons. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Even the Astartes in green power armor were startled by your sudden appearance. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A row of black gun barrels quickly turned, unleashing bolter fire upon you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. An 8-pointed star-shaped warband symbol. And an unfamiliar clan heraldry. Could it be Chaos Astartes? Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. No, they show no signs of corruption or mutation, and even the mortal soldiers are on their side. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, standing in place and enduring a large amount of bolter fire, you quickly scanned the small number of unfamiliar Astartes through the skull helmet's visor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, just as you were about to announce your Primarch identity. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Buzzing. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Those mysterious alien races that were fighting the mortal soldiers quickly gathered together, launching a charge forward. Close black lens bracket. open black lens bracket, and as they approached, a layer of mysterious energy field, barely discernible to the naked eye and only faintly detectable through the Auspex's thermal detection mode, quickly enveloped many of the Mordian Iron Guard. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. The next second, before your very eyes, large numbers of mortal soldiers, without even uttering a painful cry, silently turned into piles of decayed ash that vanished with the wind. Even the lasguns they originally held in their palms rapidly aged and broke apart. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket, psychic nullification. No, it's temporal aging. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. At this moment, your eyes widen suddenly. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You quickly issued a powerful warning to the surrounding unfamiliar Astartes. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket, quick. Immediately order the Mordian Iron Guard to retreat. This is not a battle that mortal soldiers can join. Astartes must also be more cautious to survive. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Perhaps it was your Primarch aura that infected the Astartes, or perhaps the familiar Imperial language allowed them to recognize your human allegiance. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. In any case, the bolter fire that had been raining down on you quickly stopped, and immediately shifted to the mysterious aliens. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. However, the number of Mordian Iron Guard on the battlefield was rapidly decreasing. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. By the time you successfully arrived in front of these mysterious aliens, and used the pair of enormous metal wings on the back of your power armor to successfully cleave apart several aliens. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. The number of Mordian Iron Guard was only about 20 left. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. At the same time, those unfamiliar Astartes also abruptly drew their melee weapons, launching a swift charge towards the front of the mysterious alien ranks. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You drove the brand new power armor, desperately avoiding the range of those temporal fields with reaction speeds far exceeding the Astartes. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. The enormous metal wings, rapidly extending from above the eagle-headed pauldrons, were like flexible and versatile power swords, constantly cleaving down the twisted heads or hideous bodies of the mysterious aliens. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. In an instant, your rapidly rotating gaze inadvertently saw. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Several unfamiliar Astartes who were unfortunately enveloped by the temporal field, their attack movements actually slowed down at a speed visible to the naked eye. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Subsequently, the sharp claws from the mysterious aliens heavily pierced through the tough protection of the ceramite armor like stabbing into soft bread, forcefully inserting themselves into the Astartes' bodies. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Damn it, all Astartes retreat immediately. These are not ordinary aliens that you can easily deal with. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You shouted loudly once again to the headstrong unfamiliar Astartes. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You abruptly waved the pair of enormous metal wings on the back of the power armor, and as your towering body rapidly rotated, you immediately cleared a large open space within the encirclement of many mysterious aliens. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You then moved your magnetic boots. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You quickly ran towards the unfamiliar Astartes who were still trying to attack. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Several tens of seconds later, you neatly flung all the surviving Astartes, like thrown ragdolls, violently launching them towards the streets in the distance. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. And as the pair of enormous metal wings behind you rapidly curled inwards, a dazzling light formed by energy jets quickly appeared behind the power armor. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You decided to no longer entangle with these unknown mysterious aliens. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You chose to activate the short-range flight capability of the Star Crusade pattern power armor, flying into the air towards the outer edges of the battlefield. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. And those unfamiliar Astartes who had just landed also hesitated slightly, then quickly led the few remaining 20-odd Mordian Iron Guard to retreat towards the outskirts of the battlefield. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Soon after, you slowly landed on a secluded hill far from the city streets. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. At the same time, the remaining 10-man squad of unfamiliar Astartes also arrived at a nearby location with the few remaining Mordian Iron Guard. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. As Astartes, your obedience to orders is non-existent. Which chapter are you battle brothers from? Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You slightly shook your skull helmet, and immediately drove the power armor to walk towards the other party. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. We are a strike force of the Sons of Medusa, please stop advancing immediately. Thank you for helping us fight those damned aliens just now, but you must immediately state your identity and origin. Otherwise, we will show no mercy. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. At this moment, along with the deep words of a Terminator veteran. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. The bolters of every unfamiliar Astartes present quickly rose, the black muzzles firmly locked onto your skull helmet. Close black lens bracket. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.